When a stoic rancher carries an unconscious teacher into a frontier boarding house at dawn, her skin already turning dark from rattlesnake venom, he faces an impossible choice. Wait for the doctor who won't return for days, or cross every line of propriety to save her life with his own hands and mouth. In those desperate minutes, Caleb Ward will risk not just scandal, but his own survival to pull poison from a woman he barely knows, setting in motion a bond that will transform them both. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll witness how a single act of desperate courage can change two lives forever. Hit that like button, and let's begin. The first light hadn't yet touched the mountains when Caleb Ward's horse thundered down the main street of Red Hollow Ridge, hooves striking hard-packed earth in a rhythm that spoke of urgency. The town slept still, windows dark. Storefronts shuddered against the chill that settled in the valley each night. But Caleb didn't slow. Couldn't slow. Not with the weight he carried pressed against his chest, growing more still with each passing minute. Leonjo's head rested against his shoulder, her black hair having come loose from its careful pins hours ago, now tangling in the wind of their desperate ride. Her skin had taken on a pallor that made his stomach clench, the warm brown tone fading to something gray and wrong. He'd wrapped his coat around her when the shivering started, back when she could still form words, still clutch at his shirt with trembling fingers. She hadn't moved in over an hour. "Stay with me," he muttered into the wind, knowing she couldn't hear him, saying it anyway because the silence terrified him more than the miles they'd covered. "We're almost there. Just hold on." The boarding house stood at the edge of town, a two-story structure with a wide porch and windows that glowed warm even in the pre-dawn darkness. Martha Hale never fully slept, couldn't afford to with travelers arriving at all hours, needing beds and hot meals. Caleb guided his horse straight to the front steps, not bothering with the hitching post, not caring about the noise. "Martha!" His voice cracked through the quiet like a gunshot. "Martha Hale!" He was sliding from the saddle before the horse fully stopped, cradling Leon against him with a care that contradicted the roughness of his calloused hands. She weighed almost nothing, felt too fragile, too delicate for this harsh territory. When he'd first seen her step off the stage 6 weeks ago, a small woman in travel-worn clothes carrying a leather satchel of books, he'd wondered what had possessed her to come to a place like Red Hollow Ridge. Teachers didn't last long out here. The isolation wore them down, sent them running back to civilization within a year. But Leon had been different. Even in those first weeks, he'd noticed. The way she walked through town with her shoulders square despite the stares, the way she'd opened that schoolhouse every morning without fail, ringing the bell that called children from homesteads scattered across 15 miles of rough country. The way she'd smiled at him that one time their paths crossed at the general store, a genuine expression that reached her dark eyes and made something in his chest tighten uncomfortably. Now she might die before he even learned her favorite color. The boarding house door swung open, spilling lamplight across the porch. Martha appeared in her nightdress and shawl, gray hair braided over one shoulder, her weathered face shifting from annoyance to alarm in the space of a heartbeat. "Lord have mercy, is that the teacher?" "Rattlesnake," Caleb managed, already moving toward her. 3 hours ago, maybe 4. I found her on the trail to Cedar Creek. She'd been gathering plants or some such, had a basket full of them scattered around her." Martha stepped aside, ushering him into the front parlor. "Put her on the sofa, carefully now. How bad is the bite?" "Left calf, high up." Caleb laid Leon down with infinite care, arranging her as gently as possible while his heart hammered against his ribs. In the lamplight, she looked worse. The swelling he'd noticed on the trail had spread, distorting the shape of her leg beneath the heavy fabric of her dress and petticoats. Dark veins tracked up from the bite site, visible through her skin like ink bleeding through paper. Martha knelt beside the sofa, professional efficiency taking over. She'd seen more than her share of frontier emergencies in her 20 years running this place. Broken bones, knife wounds, fever, childbirth gone wrong. Her hands moved swiftly, checking Leon's pulse at her neck, pulling back an eyelid to peer at her pupil. Her heartbeats thready, breathings shallow. Martha looked up at Caleb, and he saw his own fear reflected in her eyes. "Where's Doc Brennan?" "Rode out to the Mackenzie place 4 days ago. Emma Mackenzie's time came early. Twins. He won't be back for at least another 3 days, maybe more if there are complications." 3 days? Martha sat back on her heels, calculating odds that Caleb didn't want to think about. She doesn't have 3 days. Might not have 3 hours, truth be told. Footsteps sounded from the stairway. Other boarders woken by the commotion. Samuel Chen appeared first, the freight company clerk who'd been Lian's only connection to someone who shared her homeland, though their origins lay hundreds of miles apart in that distant country. His face went pale when he saw her. "Miss Joe, what happened?" "Snakebite," Martha said curtly. "Samuel, I need you to fetch water from the kitchen. Hot water, and lots of it. And bring my medicine box from the shelf above the stove." Others gathered now. Mrs. Patterson clutching her wrapper closed, young Henry Mills still half asleep, the Dawson brothers who worked the sawmill stopping in the doorway with identical expressions of concern. Word would spread through town within the hour. The teacher, the strange but kind woman who'd taught their children with more patience than anyone expected, who'd learned their names despite the difficulty of English, who'd brought something gentle to this hard place, was dying. Caleb barely registered them. His focus had narrowed to Lian, to the shallow rise and fall of her chest, to the way her fingers had curled into loose fists against the sofa cushions. He'd carried bodies before, knew the difference between unconsciousness and the deeper stillness that preceded death. She was sliding toward that edge, and every instinct he possessed screamed at him to do something, anything, to pull her back. "We have to cut the wound," he said quietly. "Draw out the venom." Martha's gaze snapped to him. "That's dangerous work, Caleb. I've seen it go wrong more times than right. If you cut too deep, hit the wrong vessel. If we do nothing, she dies, for certain." His voice came out harder than intended, sharpened by desperation. "I've done it before. Years back, when my brother—" He stopped, swallowed against the memory that threatened to choke him. "I know what I'm doing. Your brother died. Because I waited too long. Listened to folk who said the old ways were nonsense, that you shouldn't interfere with poison, should let it run its course." Caleb met her eyes, held her gaze. "I won't make that mistake twice." Martha studied him for a long moment, weighing options that all tasted like ash. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Samuel, forget the medicine box. Bring me the sharpest knife we have and a bottle of whiskey. The good stuff, not the rot gut we serve the miners." The room filled with murmured conversation as Martha began issuing orders. More lamps, clean cloths, a basin for water. Caleb barely heard it. He'd dropped to one knee beside the sofa, close enough to feel the heat radiating from Lian's skin. Fever had set in, her body fighting a battle it couldn't win through ordinary means. "I need to see the wound," he said. Martha hesitated only briefly before nodding. Together they arranged Lian's skirts, lifting the heavy layers with more modesty than efficiency demanded. The boarding house residents turned away instinctively, giving what privacy they could. Even in crisis, some proprieties held. The bite site made Caleb's jaw clench. 2 puncture marks, each surrounded by a spreading darkness that spoke of venom traveling through tissue. The entire calf had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, the skin stretched tight and discolored. He'd seen similar wounds before, knew what they meant. The snake had been large, the bite deep, the venom load substantial. Time was running out faster than he'd feared. Samuel returned with the knife and whiskey, his hands shaking slightly as he passed them over. Caleb took the bottle first, uncorked it, and poured a generous amount over the blade. The sharp scent of alcohol cut through the other smells. Lamp oil, wood smoke, the faint sweetness that sometimes preceded death. "Hold her steady," he told Martha. "She might wake when I cut. Might fight. She won't wake." Martha's voice carried a sadness that made Caleb's hands still. "She's too far gone." But he had to try anyway. The knife was sharp. Martha kept her kitchen tools well maintained. Caleb positioned the blade over one puncture mark, angling it to create a cut that would allow drainage without causing excessive damage. His hands were steady despite the tremor running through his chest. He'd worked cattle, horses, even operated on his own flesh when circumstances demanded. He understood anatomy, knew where blood vessels ran close to the surface, could judge depth by feel. He pressed down, and blood welled up. Too dark, almost black. Lian's body jerked, a convulsive movement that made Martha grab her shoulders to keep her from rolling off the sofa. Her eyes didn't open, but a sound escaped her throat, raw and hurt and barely human. "Easy," Caleb murmured, not sure if he was talking to Leon or himself. "Easy now." He made the second cut quickly, parallel to the first, creating an X pattern that would maximize drainage. More blood flowed, carrying with it the thick, viscous quality that meant venom. He set the knife aside and pressed his thumbs around the wound, applying pressure to encourage the poison out. The blood kept coming, but not fast enough. He could see it in the way the swelling remained unchanged, feel it in the heat beneath his hands. The venom had spread too far, worked too deep. Cutting wouldn't be enough. His brother's face flashed through his memory. Thomas, laughing and vital one moment, gray and still the next. The snake had struck him while they were clearing brush for a fence line. Caleb had been 16, Thomas 20, and they'd waited for help that arrived too late. The old Cherokee man who lived in the hills had come eventually, had looked at Thomas's body and shaken his head sadly. "You should have drawn it out," he'd said in his careful English. "When the bite is fresh, when the poison still sits near the surface, you put your mouth to the wound and pull it free. It's the old way, the way that works when nothing else will." Caleb had been horrified then, young and convinced that civilization meant proper medicine, proper doctors, proper methods. The Cherokee man had simply looked at him with eyes that had seen too many people die from waiting for proper help that never came. Now, 15 years later, Caleb understood. He looked up at Martha, saw her watching him with an expression that said she'd already guessed what he was thinking. "You can't," she said quietly. "Caleb, if you take that poison into your own mouth, I spit it out. Rinse with whiskey. The Cherokee taught me, if you don't have open sores in your mouth, if you're careful, the risk is small. Small isn't none. Neither is doing nothing." He reached for the whiskey bottle, took a long swallow that burned down his throat, swished it around his mouth before spitting into the basin Samuel had brought. His gums, his tongue, he checked both carefully with his fingers, searching for any cut or sore that might let venom into his bloodstream. Nothing. His mouth was sound. Around them, the boarding house residents had gone silent. Mrs. Patterson's hand was pressed to her mouth. Samuel stood frozen with the water basin, his knuckles white on the handles. The Dawson brothers exchanged glances that spoke volumes about what they were witnessing, because everyone in that room understood what Caleb was about to do. Understood that propriety didn't just frown on a man putting his mouth to a woman's bare leg, it condemned it absolutely. Never mind that Leon Joe was unconscious and dying, never mind that this might be the only chance to save her life. The rules of decent society were clear, and Caleb Ward was about to shatter them beyond repair. He didn't care. "Turn away if it troubles you," he said to the room at large, not looking at anyone. "But I'm not letting her die." Martha drew in a long breath, then nodded. "Do what you need to do. I'll answer to anyone who objects." Caleb bent over Leon's leg, positioning himself so his mouth was directly over the wound. This close, he could smell the sickness, the sweet rot scent of venom breaking down tissue. His stomach turned, but he pushed past it, pressed his mouth to her skin, sealed his lips around the cuts he'd made, and drew in. The taste hit him immediately, copper and salt and something else, something wrong that made every instinct scream to stop. He ignored it, creating suction the way he'd pull water through a reed, focusing entirely on extracting the poison from her flesh. Blood and fluid filled his mouth. He held it briefly, feeling the thickness, then turned his head and spat into the basin. The liquid came out dark, almost black, flecked with tissue. He reached for the whiskey, rinsed, spat again, then bent back to the wound and repeated the process. Draw, hold, spit, rinse, draw, hold, spit, rinse. His world narrowed to that rhythm, to the mechanical process of pulling poison from her body. His jaw ached from the suction. The taste coated his mouth despite the whiskey rinses. He lost track of how many times he repeated the cycle. 10, 20, more. Sweat dampened his shirt, dripped from his forehead. The lamplight seemed to waver and pulse. But slowly, gradually, the fluid coming from the wound began to change. Less black, more red. Thinner. Closer to normal blood. "Caleb," Martha's voice came from somewhere distant. "Caleb, that's enough. You need to stop." He ignored her, drew again. The taste was different now, Still wrong, but less concentrated. The venom was thinning out. "Caleb." Firmer this time. A hand on his shoulder. "You're going to hurt yourself. Stop." One more time. Just one more. He pulled hard, held the fluid in his mouth while his head spun, then turned and spat into the basin. This time the liquid looked almost normal, dark red blood with only traces of that black viscosity. He rinsed with whiskey, the alcohol burning against his raw throat, and finally sat back on his heels. The room tilted. He braced one hand against the sofa to keep from falling over, breathing hard through his mouth because his nose was full of that sweet rot smell. His tongue felt thick and strange. His vision had gone fuzzy at the edges. "Easy now." Martha appeared beside him with a cup of water. "Drink this. Slow." He obeyed, letting the clean water wash away the last traces of taste. The world gradually steadied. He became aware of other sensations, his knees aching from the hard floor, his shoulders tight from hunching over, his heart hammering against his ribs. And underneath it all, a fear that whispered, what if it wasn't enough? He looked at Leanne. For a long moment, nothing changed. She lay still and pale on the sofa, her chest barely moving. The swelling in her leg remained grotesque. Dark veins still tracked upward beneath her skin. Then, so subtle he almost missed it, her breathing deepened. Just slightly, just enough. "Look." Samuel's voice was hushed, reverent. "The swelling, is it going down?" Caleb studied her calf with the intensity of a man reading prophecy in tea leaves. The discoloration remained, but the tightness of the skin seemed fractionally less severe. The dark veins appeared slightly faded, or was that just desperate hope painting false patterns on reality? Martha pressed her fingers to Leon's wrist, counting heartbeats against the ticking of the mantel clock. "Pulse is stronger, still fast, still irregular, but stronger than before." Hope flickered in Caleb's chest, small and fragile. But there. He reached for the clean cloth Samuel had brought, began gently cleaning the blood from around the wound. His hands moved with automatic care, wrapping her calf in bandages that he knew would need changing within hours. The work gave him something to focus on beyond the fear, beyond the exhaustion that was starting to pull at him. "She'll need watching," Martha said quietly. "Constant watching. If the fever spikes, if the swelling gets worse again, I'll stay." The words came out before Caleb fully thought them through, but once spoken, he didn't take them back. "I'll watch her." "Caleb," Martha's expression was complex, mixing concern with something that might have been pity. "People will talk. You know they will. A single man keeping vigil over an unmarried woman. Let them talk." He secured the bandage with fingers that had started to shake from adrenaline crash. "I'm not leaving her alone." "I'll stay too," Samuel offered quickly. "For propriety. I can sit with her during the day, translate if she wakes and needs." His voice caught. "When she wakes." Caleb nodded, grateful for the younger man's presence, even as part of him wanted to send everyone away, to keep this strange vigil alone. But Samuel was right. Even in crisis, even with a life hanging in the balance, the rules of society demanded witnesses, demanded chaperones, demanded that nothing improper occur. As if anything about this night had been proper. Martha stood, her knees cracking in the quiet. "The rest of you, back to bed. There's nothing more to be done tonight." She fixed the gathered boarders with a look that brooked no argument. "And I expect discretion. Miss Jo deserves her privacy, and Caleb here just saved her life at considerable risk to himself. Anyone who speaks ill of what happened in this room will answer to me. Are we clear?" A chorus of murmured agreement. The residents filed out slowly, casting backward glances at the sofa where Leanne lay. Mrs. Patterson paused at the doorway, her eyes soft. "You did good, Mr. Ward," she said quietly. "Real good." Then they were gone, leaving only Caleb, Martha, and Samuel in the lamplit parlor. Dawn had started to creep through the windows, thin gray light that made the room feel simultaneously more real and less. Caleb pulled a chair close to the sofa and sank into it, every muscle in his body suddenly screaming exhaustion. "I'll bring coffee," Martha said, "and food, though I doubt any of us feel much like eating. Samuel, help me in the kitchen." They left him alone with Leanne. In the growing light, Caleb could see her more clearly. Small features that spoke of careful breeding, high cheekbones, a delicate nose, lips that were currently too pale but probably looked lovely when they smiled. Her hair spread across the pillow in a dark waterfall, the kind of thick, straight hair he'd never seen before she arrived in Red Hollow Ridge. One hand had curled against her chest, fingers slightly bent as if reaching for something even in unconsciousness. He'd never been this close to her before, never had reason to be. She was the teacher, educated and refined despite her foreign birth. He was just a rancher who could barely write his own name, whose hands were more familiar with rope and leather than books and learning. But he'd put his mouth to her skin, had tasted her blood, had fought death for her with nothing but desperate determination and half-remembered knowledge from a Cherokee man who'd tried to teach him something his young mind couldn't accept. The intimacy of it struck him suddenly, made heat rise in his face. If she knew when she woke, would she be horrified, grateful? Both? "Don't die," he whispered to her still form. "Please, I can't." He stopped, swallowed hard. "Just don't die." Her breathing continued, steady now. The dark veins had definitely faded. He could see it clearly in the growing daylight. The swelling had begun to recede, slowly but unmistakably. She was fighting, her body rallying against the poison he'd helped remove. She was going to live. The knowledge hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing his breath, making his eyes burn. She was going to live. He'd gotten to her in time, had done what needed doing, had saved her, and everything had changed, because he'd touched her in ways no proper man touched a woman outside of marriage, had seen her leg bare to the thigh, had put his mouth on her skin and drawn her blood into his own body. In that desperate hour, they'd become connected in a way that society would never understand or forgive. People would talk. Martha was right about that. They'd already be talking, word spreading from the boarding house through town like wildfire. By noon, everyone in Red Hollow Ridge would know what Caleb Ward had done to save the teacher's life. Some would praise him. Others would condemn him. Most would simply watch, waiting to see what happened next. Caleb reached out slowly, carefully, and let his fingertips rest against Leanne's hand where it curled on the sofa. Her skin was still too warm, fever lingering, but the quality of heat had changed. This was the body's natural fight against injury, not the terrible burning of poison. "I've got you," he murmured. "I won't let anything else hurt you. I promise." Outside, Red Hollow Ridge was waking up. He could hear it, the distant sound of a rooster crowing, the creak of shutters being opened, the first stirrings of a town preparing for another day. Soon the street would fill with people going about their business. The general store would open. The saloon would start serving breakfast to the miners coming off night shift. The schoolhouse bell would ring, though there would be no teacher to answer it. And in the boarding house parlor, Caleb Ward would keep watch over a woman he barely knew, bound to her now by actions that could never be undone. Martha returned with coffee and fresh bread. Samuel followed with a basin of clean water and more bandages. They worked in quiet efficiency, changing Leanne's dressing, monitoring her vital signs, making her as comfortable as possible. The wound looked better in daylight, angry and inflamed, yes, but without the black tinge of advancing poison. The cuts Caleb had made would scar, but she would heal. "Get some rest," Martha told him as the morning light strengthened. "Samuel and I can watch her for a few hours." Caleb shook his head. "I'm staying." "You're dead on your feet. Won't do her any good if you collapse." "I'm staying." Martha studied him with eyes that had seen enough of human nature to recognize immovable determination. She sighed, set a cup of coffee on the side table beside his chair, and draped a blanket over his shoulders. "Stubborn fool," she muttered, but there was affection in it. The morning progressed. Samuel sat in a chair by the window, reading from a small book he'd produced from his pocket. Martha moved between the parlor and her other duties, checking on Leanne every half hour with professional thoroughness. Caleb simply watched, his entire focus narrowed to the woman on the sofa. Around 10 o'clock, Leanne stirred. It was nothing dramatic, just a small movement, her head turning slightly on the pillow. But Caleb sat forward instantly, every exhausted muscle suddenly alert. "Leanne?" He caught himself, corrected. "Miss Joe?" Her eyelids fluttered. For a moment he thought she might wake, might open her eyes and see him sitting there. But she settled again, slipping back into whatever dreams or darkness held her. Still, it was progress. Movement meant consciousness trying to surface, meant her mind was fighting its way back from the edge where he'd found her. Good, Martha said from the doorway. That's very good. The worst is likely past. Likely, not certainly. The word hung in the air like a blade. The day wore on. Visitors came to the boarding house, concerned townspeople wanting to know about the teacher's condition, bringing flowers and offers of prayer and herbal remedies passed down from grandmothers. Martha turned most of them away with polite firmness, accepting the gifts but protecting Leon's privacy. Only a few were allowed in, Sarah Bennett from the general store, who'd befriended Leanne in those first weeks, Thomas Gray, the mayor whose daughter attended the school, and Pastor Williams, who came to offer spiritual comfort, whether wanted or not. They all stared at Caleb sitting vigil in his blood-stained shirt, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. They all had questions in their eyes that they didn't quite voice. They all left with the same troubled expression that said the story they'd heard was spreading faster than they'd expected. Caleb ignored them, let them think what they wanted. None of it mattered compared to the rise and fall of Leon's chest, the gradual return of normal color to her skin, the way her body temperature was slowly dropping back toward something that wouldn't burn itself out. Afternoon faded toward evening. Martha lit lamps against the growing darkness. Samuel had dozed off in his chair, the book fallen open across his lap, and Caleb continued his watch, sustained by coffee and stubborn will, and the knowledge that he couldn't leave, wouldn't leave, not until he knew for certain she would survive. The fever broke just after sunset. One moment Leanne's skin was fever-hot beneath his checking hand. The next, a fine sheen of sweat broke across her forehead, and her temperature began dropping so quickly that Martha rushed to pile blankets over her. The crisis point had passed. Her body had won. "She's through it," Martha whispered, wonder and relief mixing in her voice. "Lord above, Caleb, she's actually through it." He didn't trust himself to speak, just nodded, throat tight, eyes burning. She'd survived. Against odds that would have killed most people, she'd survived. And he'd helped. His desperate, improper, scandalous intervention had worked. In the chair by the window, Samuel woke with a start, saw their expressions, and broke into a smile that transformed his whole face. "She's better? Miss Joe is better?" "The worst has passed," Martha confirmed. "She'll need days to recover fully, but yes, she's going to make it." Samuel stood, crossed to the sofa, and pressed his hands together in a gesture Caleb didn't recognize but understood anyway. Gratitude, relief, prayer-given form. Then the young man looked at Caleb with eyes that shone suspiciously bright. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for saving her." Caleb managed a nod, not trusting his voice. The night deepened. Martha convinced Samuel to get proper rest, promising to wake him if anything changed. The boarding house settled into quiet, most residents already asleep. Only Caleb remained in the parlor, keeping his vigil as the lamps burned low. Around midnight, Leon's eyes opened. At first, Caleb thought he was imagining it, exhaustion playing tricks with his vision. But then her gaze focused, moved, found him sitting beside her. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, this woman and the man who'd saved her life. Her lips moved. He leaned closer, straining to hear. "Water," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Please." He nearly knocked over his chair in his haste to pour water from the pitcher Martha had left. His hands shook as he held the cup to her lips, supporting her head with his other hand while she drank. She managed only a few sips before exhaustion pulled her back down. But before she slipped away again, her fingers found his wrist, held on with surprising strength. "You," she breathed. "You were... I remember..." "Hush now, you need to rest." "You saved me." Not a question, a statement of simple fact. "Had to." His voice came out rougher than intended. Couldn't just let you die." Something flickered in her dark eyes. Gratitude, yes, but also a question. A dawning awareness of what saving her must have required, what boundaries must have been crossed. Her gaze dropped to his mouth, then back to his eyes, and he saw understanding bloom there, along with the fever flush still painting her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. Then her eyes closed again, and she was gone. Not dying, just sleeping, her body demanding the rest it needed to heal. Caleb sat back slowly, his heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. She'd looked at him with awareness, with intelligence, with something he couldn't quite name. She'd understood, at least partially, what he'd done. And instead of horror or shame, he'd seen gratitude. It was enough. More than enough. He settled back into his chair, pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders, and resumed his watch. Dawn would come eventually. People would talk, decisions would need to be made, consequences would have to be faced. But for now, in this quiet hour, all that mattered was the steady sound of her breathing and the knowledge that she would wake again, would walk again, would stand in front of her schoolhouse and ring that bell and teach children who needed her patience and kindness. She would live. And Caleb Ward, rough-handed rancher who could barely read, had given her that chance, had put his mouth to her skin and pulled poison from her blood and bound himself to her in ways he was only beginning to understand. Outside, Red Hollow Ridge slept under a blanket of stars. Inside, a man kept vigil over a woman whose life had become unexpectedly tangled with his own. The crisis had passed, but the story, their story, was only beginning. The second day brought whispers that crept through Red Hollow Ridge like morning fog through the valley. Caleb heard them even through the boarding house walls, low voices exchanging theories and judgments, the particular tone people used when discussing scandal. He dozed fitfully in the chair beside Leon's sofa, waking every time she stirred, checking her temperature with the back of his hand the way Martha had shown him. Each time he surfaced from exhausted sleep, the murmurs from the street seemed louder. Martha brought him breakfast as the sun climbed higher. Eggs and biscuits he barely tasted, strong coffee that helped clear the fog from his mind. She moved quietly, efficiently, changing Leon's bandages with practiced hands, while Caleb looked away to preserve what modesty remained. "The swelling's definitely down," Martha said, rewrapping the calf with clean cloth. "Color's better too. Whatever you did, however you did it, it worked." "How bad is the talk?" Caleb asked, voice rough from disuse. Martha's hands paused briefly before continuing their work. "About what you'd expect. Some folks are calling you a hero. Others are calling you something considerably less flattering." She secured the bandage with a knot that spoke of long practice. "Sarah Bennett was in here an hour ago, defending you to Mrs. Patterson's sister. Said any man willing to risk his own life to save another deserved respect, not judgment." "And Mrs. Patterson's sister?" "Said there are proper ways to do things, even in emergencies." Martha finished with the bandages and covered Lion's leg with a light blanket. "Said if it was her daughter lying there, she'd rather the girl died decent than lived with the shame of—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. Foolish woman doesn't know what she's talking about. Caleb looked at Leon's sleeping face, still too pale, but no longer carrying that awful gray tinge. "I'd do it again. Every word they say, every bit of judgment, I'd still do exactly the same." "I know." Martha squeezed his shoulder briefly. "That's why some folks are defending you so hard. They recognize real courage when they see it, even if it doesn't come wrapped in propriety." The day wore on with agonizing slowness. Samuel returned mid-morning, bringing fresh clothes from Caleb's ranch. His foreman had ridden them in after hearing what happened. Caleb changed in the washroom, scrubbing dried blood from his hands and forearms, staring at his reflection in the small mirror. He looked hollowed out, older, like he'd lived a year in the past 24 hours. When he returned to the parlor, Leon was awake again. Her eyes tracked him as he crossed the room, and he saw clarity there that had been absent before. She was truly present now, consciousness no longer slipping away after moments. Martha sat beside her, helping her drink water in small, careful sips. "Easy now," Martha murmured. "Not too fast or you'll make yourself sick." Leon managed half a cup before her head fell back against the pillow, exhausted from even that small effort. But her gaze found Caleb again, held him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "Mr. Ward." Her voice was barely above a whisper, accent making the syllables careful and deliberate. "They tell me you found me on the trail." Caleb moved closer, not sure what distance was appropriate now. Everything felt strange and uncertain. "Yes, ma'am. Yesterday morning, before dawn, you'd been gathering plants. Medicinal herbs." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Foolish of me. I thought I knew the safe paths. Snake was probably just as surprised as you were. They don't usually strike unless threatened." I stepped near its hiding place, heard the rattle too late. Her hand moved beneath the blanket, fingers touching her bandaged calf with evident pain. I remember falling. Remember trying to walk, but my leg wouldn't. She stopped, swallowed. The rest is pieces, darkness, cold, and then pain, and someone carrying me. That was me. Brought you straight here. Her eyes searched his face with an openness that made him want to look away and hold her gaze simultaneously. Martha says you saved my life. That without you, the poison would have... She didn't finish, didn't need to. Did what needed doing. She says you cut the wound, drew the venom out. Leon's voice dropped even lower. With your mouth. The room went very quiet. Even Martha had gone still, watching them both with an expression Caleb couldn't read. Samuel stood by the window, politely looking elsewhere, but obviously listening. Caleb cleared his throat. Yes, ma'am. Old Cherokee method. Wasn't sure it would work, but... He stopped, met her eyes directly. I couldn't just watch you die. Color rose in Leon's cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. She looked down at her hands, fingers twisting together on top of the blanket. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet he had to lean closer to hear. That was very brave and very improper. I know. People will talk. Already are. She looked up at him then, and he saw something fierce in her dark eyes despite the weakness of her body. Then let them talk. I'm alive because of you. That matters more than gossip. Something in Caleb's chest loosened at those words. He'd been braced for recrimination, for shame, for her to turn away from him in embarrassment at what he'd done. Instead, she met his gaze steadily, chin lifted in defiance of propriety and judgment both. You should rest, he said, voice rougher than intended. You're still weak. I've been resting. She paused, seeming to gather strength. I want to understand what happened. Martha told me some, but I need to hear it from you. So Caleb told her. Told her about finding her on the trail, pale and barely breathing. About the desperate ride to town, the decision to cut and draw the venom when waiting for the doctor would have meant death. He left nothing out. Not the shocked gasps from the boarding house residents, not the whiskey rinses, not the way her blood had tasted like copper and poison on his tongue. Leon listened without interrupting, her expression shifting between gratitude and something that looked like wonder. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You took the poison into your own body, she finally said. You could have died too. Not likely. I was careful. But possible. It wasn't a question. Caleb shrugged, uncomfortable with her intensity. Possible, yes. But you'd have died for certain if I'd done nothing. The math seemed simple enough. Simple, she laughed, a small sound that turned into a cough. Martha was there instantly with water, but Leanne waved her away gently. There's nothing simple about risking your life for a stranger, Mr. Ward. We're not strangers. You teach in this town. That makes you one of us. I've been here 6 weeks. Long enough. Their eyes met again, and something passed between them. An understanding, a recognition of connection formed in desperate circumstances. Caleb felt it like a physical thing, warm and unsettling and impossible to ignore. Martha cleared her throat. Miss Jo needs proper rest now, Caleb. And you need to go home, clean up, sleep in an actual bed. I'm fine here. You're dead on your feet and starting to smell like a barn. Martha's tone left no room for argument. Samuel and I will watch her. If anything changes, we'll send for you immediately. Caleb wanted to protest, but exhaustion was catching up with him fast. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the crisis was long gone, leaving only bone-deep weariness. He looked at Lion, found her watching him with concern. Go, she said softly. Please, you've done so much already. I'll come back tomorrow, check on you. I'd like that. The simple words shouldn't have meant so much, but they settled into Caleb's chest like warmth on a cold day. He nodded to Martha, acknowledged Samuel with a glance, and forced himself to walk away from the sofa, even though every instinct screamed to stay. Outside, the afternoon sun hit him like a wall. He stood on the boarding house porch, blinking against the brightness, trying to remember where he'd left his horse. Everything felt slightly unreal, like he was moving through someone else's life. Mr. Ward! He turned to find Mayor Gray approaching, his expression carefully neutral. Thomas Gray was a good man, fair-minded and reasonable, but he carried the weight of the town's expectations on his shoulders. Whatever he had to say, it wouldn't be entirely comfortable. Mayor, heard what you did for Miss Joe. That took courage. Just did what needed doing. Gray studied him for a moment, shrewd eyes taking in Caleb's exhausted state and blood-stained clothes. Walk with me? It wasn't really a request. Caleb fell into step beside the mayor, heading down the street away from the boarding house. Around them, Red Hollow Ridge went about its business. Miners heading to the saloon, women shopping at the general store, children running between buildings in games of tag. But Caleb felt eyes on them, felt the weight of attention and speculation. The town's divided, Gray said quietly as they walked. Half think you're a hero, the other half think you compromised Miss Joe's reputation beyond repair. She's alive, that's what matters. I agree, but life isn't that simple, as you well know. The mayor paused at the corner, looking out toward the mountains that ringed the valley. Sarah Bennett and a few others are organizing, want to make sure people understand the circumstances, defend you and Miss Joe both. But Mrs. Patterson and her crowd are already calling for Miss Joe to be dismissed from her teaching position. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. She almost died. How can they? Because people are frightened by anything that challenges their understanding of how things should be. Gray's voice was tired. A man putting his mouth on a woman's bare skin, even to save her life, it violates something fundamental in their minds. They can't separate the act from the intent. My intent was keeping her alive. I know that, you know that, but fear and propriety make strange bedfellows. The mayor turned to face him directly. I'm on your side, Caleb. Miss Joe is the best teacher we've had in years. She's patient with the children, dedicated, brings something gentle to this hard place. I don't want to lose her, but I also can't ignore the town's concerns entirely. What are you asking me to do? Nothing yet, just be aware. Be careful. The situation is delicate. Gray hesitated, then added more quietly, and if I might offer some advice, don't visit her alone. Make sure Martha or Samuel is always present. Don't give the gossips any more ammunition than they already have. The advice was sound, practical, and made Caleb want to put his fist through something, but he nodded stiffly, understanding the political realities even as they grated against everything he felt. I'll be careful. Good man. Gray clapped him on the shoulder. Get some rest. You look like death warmed over. Caleb made his way to the livery stable where his horse waited, already fed and brushed by the stable hand. The ride home to his ranch took an hour, following trails he knew by heart, even in his exhausted state. The land spread out around him, rolling hills giving way to mountains, sage and scrub brush breaking the monotony of grass, the occasional stand of aspens marking where springs fed the dry earth. He'd built this life alone after Thomas died, bought the land with money saved from years of hard work, raised cattle and horses, carved out a place in Red Hollow Ridge through sweat and stubbornness. It was a good life, honest and straightforward. He knew where he stood with cattle and land and weather. People were more complicated, their judgments less predictable. His foreman, Jack Matthews, met him at the barn with a concerned expression. Boss? Heard about the teacher. That true what they're saying? Depends what they're saying. That you saved her life doing something that's got half the town scandalized. Then yes, it's true. Jack studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. She seems like a decent woman. Glad she made it. He took the horse's reins. You look like you need sleep more than conversation. I'll handle things here. Caleb made it to his small house, barely larger than a cabin, and collapsed on his bed without bothering to undress further. Sleep claimed him instantly, deep and dreamless, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion. He woke in darkness, disoriented and reaching for something he couldn't name. The house was quiet around him, familiar sounds of wood settling and wind outside. For a moment he couldn't remember why his chest felt tight, why urgency pulled at him. Then memory returned. Leon on the sofa, her eyes meeting his, the whispered thank you that had carried more weight than any formal speech. He lay in the darkness, staring at ceiling beams he couldn't see, and tried to make sense of the tangle in his chest. He barely knew her, had exchanged perhaps a dozen words with her before yesterday. She was educated and refined, spoke multiple languages, came from a world he couldn't begin to understand. He was a rancher who'd learned to read late and poorly, whose hands were better suited to rope and leather than books and civilized conversation. But he'd put his mouth to her skin and tasted her blood, and that created a bond he couldn't explain or dismiss. He'd fought for her life with desperate determination, and won, and now something in him was tied to her survival in ways that defied logic. Sleep claimed him again eventually, fitful this time, full of fragmented dreams where he searched for someone in darkness and couldn't find them. Morning came with gray light and the sound of rain on the roof. Caleb rose, washed, dressed in clean clothes, and rode back to town through the drizzle. Water ran down his hat brim and soaked his shoulders, but he barely noticed. His mind was already at the boarding house, wondering if Leanne had slept well, if the swelling had continued to recede, if she'd asked for him. The boarding house was quiet when he arrived, most residents still at breakfast. Martha met him at the door with a knowing look. "She's awake. Been asking when you'd come." Something warm bloomed in Caleb's chest. "How is she?" "Better every hour. The resilience in that woman is remarkable." Martha led him to the parlor where Leanne sat propped up on the sofa, a blanket across her lap and a book in her hands. She looked up as he entered, and her face transformed with a smile. "Mr. Ward, you came back." "Said I would." He stopped a respectful distance away, acutely aware of Martha's presence and the mayor's advice about propriety. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was bitten by a snake and nearly died." Her smile took any sting from the words. "But alive, which is considerably better than the alternative." He found himself smiling back, tension easing slightly. "Can't argue with that." "Sit, please. You make me nervous standing there like you're about to flee." Caleb settled into the chair he'd occupied during his vigil, the same chair where he'd kept watch through the night. The room felt different in daylight, with Leanne conscious and talking, less desperate, more uncertain. He didn't know how to navigate this new territory. "Samuel brought me books from my rooms," Leanne said, gesturing to the small stack beside her. "And Martha has been feeding me soup and scolding me for trying to move too much." She paused, her expression growing serious. "They've also been telling me about the town's reaction." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Don't worry about that." "How can I not worry? You saved my life, and now people are questioning your character because of it." Her hands twisted together on the book's cover. "That's not right. It's not fair to you." "Life isn't fair. Learned that early." "But still, Miss Joe." He leaned forward, held her gaze. "I'd do it again. Every whisper, every judgment, every bit of scandal, I'd still make the same choice. So whatever folks are saying, it doesn't matter to me. You're alive. That's what matters." She blinked rapidly, eyes suddenly bright. "You keep saying that, like my life has value beyond the gossip it created." "Because it does." The words came out fiercer than he intended. "You teach children who'd have no education otherwise. You brought something gentle to a town that desperately needed it. One life like yours is worth 100 people's small-minded opinions." For a long moment, Leanne simply looked at him, something shifting in her expression that he couldn't quite read. Then she reached out slowly, carefully, and rested her hand on his where it gripped the chair arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for saving me, for seeing me as someone worth saving." Her touch was light, barely there, but Caleb felt it like a brand. His pulse kicked up, awareness flooding through him, the warmth of her palm, the delicate bones of her fingers, the simple intimacy of the gesture. He should pull away, should maintain proper distance. Instead, he turned his hand over, let his fingers curl gently around hers. "You're worth saving," he said quietly. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Martha cleared her throat from the doorway, and they sprang apart like guilty children. But when Caleb glanced at the older woman, he saw only gentle amusement in her expression. "Pastor Williams is here to see Miss Joe," Martha announced. "Says he wants to offer comfort and prayer." Leanne's hand had retreated beneath the blanket, but Caleb could still feel the phantom warmth of her touch. "Of course. Please send him in." The pastor entered with his usual self-important bearing, Bible clutched to his chest. He barely acknowledged Caleb's presence before launching into a speech about suffering and redemption that made Caleb's teeth ache. Leanne listened politely, thanked him for his concern, and gently deflected his suggestions that perhaps this trial was meant to teach her humility. When the pastor finally left, Leanne slumped back against the cushions with evident relief. "That man," she muttered, "has never met a crisis he couldn't turn into a sermon." Caleb surprised himself by laughing, a real laugh that eased some of the tension coiled in his chest. Leanne grinned at him, mischief dancing in her eyes, and for a moment she looked younger, lighter, less weighed down by pain and recovery. The days began to establish a rhythm after that. Caleb rode into town each morning, spent hours at the boarding house talking with Leanne while Martha or Samuel maintained a chaperone's presence. They talked about everything and nothing, her journey from across the ocean, his years building the ranch, the children she taught, and the lessons they struggled with, the land he loved and its harsh beauty. She told him about growing up in a port city he couldn't imagine, about learning English from books until the words felt familiar, but the speaking remained difficult. About deciding to come to America seeking something she couldn't quite name, about answering the advertisement for a teacher in a frontier town, because it seemed like an adventure, and she'd always been too curious for her own good. He told her about Thomas, about learning ranching the hard way after his brother died, about the Cherokee man who'd tried to teach him respect for old knowledge, and how he'd been too young and stupid to listen until it was too late, about loving this land despite its harshness, finding peace in the work and the silence and the simple honesty of animals. With each conversation, the connection between them deepened. Caleb found himself looking forward to those hours in the boarding house parlor more than anything else in his day. Found himself thinking about her at odd moments, while checking fence lines, while working with his horses, while lying in bed trying to sleep. Her smile, her laugh, the way she listened with complete attention when he spoke, the intelligence that shone in her dark eyes. He was falling for her. The knowledge settled into his chest with the weight of certainty and the ache of impossibility. She was educated, refined, from a world completely foreign to his rough rancher's life. What could he possibly offer someone like her? But then she'd look at him with warmth in her expression, would reach out to touch his hand when making a point, would save her brightest smile for when he entered the room. And he'd let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, she felt something too. On the 5th day, Leanne insisted on trying to walk. "I cannot stay on this sofa forever," she told Martha firmly. "The leg is healing. I need to use it or risk it growing weak." Martha protested, worried about reopening the wound. But Caleb saw the determination in Leanne's eyes and recognized it, the same stubbornness that had brought her across an ocean to teach in a frontier town. "Let her try," he said quietly. "I'll help. Won't let her fall." So they helped her stand, Martha supporting one side while Caleb took the other. Leanne's face went pale with pain as her weight settled onto the injured leg, but she set her jaw and took one careful step, then another. "That's enough for today," Martha said, after 3 steps left Leanne trembling and breathless. But the next day they tried again, and the day after that. Each time Leanne managed a little more, pushed a little further, refused to let the injury defeat her. Caleb stayed close, his arm around her waist to steady her, feeling the determination in her small frame. She leaned on him without hesitation, trusted him to catch her when her leg threatened to buckle, and he found himself treasuring that trust more than anything. A week after the snakebite, Sarah Bennett came to visit with news that made Caleb's blood run cold. "There's going to be a town meeting," she said, her usually cheerful face troubled. "Mrs. Patterson and her supporters want to discuss Miss Joe's position at the school. They're claiming that what happened has made her unfit to teach the children." "That's ridiculous," Martha snapped. "She was the victim here." "I know, but they're painting it differently, saying that a woman who allowed such improper treatment—" "She was unconscious," Caleb interrupted, anger making his voice harsh. "She didn't allow anything. I made the choice to save her life." "You're preaching to the converted," Sarah said. "I'm on your side, and so are a good number of folks. But Mrs. Patterson has influence, and she's using it." She looked at Leon with sympathy. "I'm sorry. This isn't fair to you." Leanne had gone very still on the sofa, her face carefully expressionless in a way that meant she was fighting strong emotion. "When is this meeting?" "Tomorrow night, at the church." "Then I'll be there." "Miss Joe, you can barely walk." "I'll be there," Leanne repeated, steel beneath the quiet words. "If they're going to judge me, they'll do it to my face, not behind my back." Caleb looked at her, at the straight spine despite obvious pain, at the lifted chin and fierce eyes. Pride surged through him, mixed with fury at the people who would put her through this after everything she'd endured. "I'll take you," he said. "If you're going to face them, you won't do it alone." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, solidarity, determination, and underneath it all, that growing warmth that neither of them had acknowledged aloud. "Thank you," Leon said softly. The next evening arrived too quickly. Caleb dressed in his best clothes, brushed his hat, and rode to the boarding house as the sun set behind the mountains. He found Leanne waiting in the parlor, dressed in a simple but elegant dress that Martha had altered to accommodate the bandages still wrapped around her calf. She looked pale, but composed, every inch the educated teacher despite the circumstances. "Ready?" Caleb asked. "No, but I'll go anyway." He offered his arm, and she took it, leaning on him heavily as they made their way outside to the wagon he'd brought. The ride to the church was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Around them, Red Hollow Ridge prepared for the meeting, people streaming toward the white building at the edge of town, their faces ranging from sympathetic to condemning. Inside, the church was already packed, every pew filled, people standing along the walls, the air thick with tension and speculation. Conversation stopped as Caleb helped Leanne through the door, all eyes turning to watch them make their slow way down the aisle. Caleb felt the weight of their stares, heard the whispers that resumed the moment they passed. But he kept his focus on Leanne, on making sure she didn't stumble, on getting her safely to the front pew where Sarah Bennett had saved them seats. Mayor Gray stood at the pulpit, his expression troubled. He waited until they were settled, until the crowd quieted, before speaking. "We're here tonight to discuss a difficult matter," he began. "Miss Joe's position as our schoolteacher in light of recent events. I want to make clear from the start, this is a discussion, not a trial. We're here to talk, to understand different perspectives, and hopefully to find a path forward that serves everyone." Mrs. Patterson stood immediately, her face flushed with righteous conviction. "There's nothing to discuss, Mayor. What happened was a scandal, pure and simple. A man putting his mouth on a woman's bare flesh. I don't care what the reason was. It violated every standard of decent behavior." "He saved her life," Sarah called out from beside them. "At what cost?" Mrs. Patterson shot back. "Her reputation is ruined. How can we trust our children to a woman who's been touched in such an improper way?" Caleb's hands clenched on his knees. But before he could speak, Leanne stood. The movement was careful, painful, but she managed it with dignity. The crowd fell silent, watching her. "Mrs. Patterson," Leanne said, her accent making the words precise and measured, "you are correct. What Mr. Ward did was improper by the standards of polite society. But polite society does not account for dying alone on a trail with poison in your blood." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I was unconscious. I could not give permission or withhold it. Mr. Ward made a choice to save my life using knowledge he possessed, and I am grateful beyond words for that choice. But the scandal is in the minds of those who choose to see impropriety where there was only desperate mercy." Leanne's voice remained calm, but strength ran through it. "I understand if you believe I am no longer fit to teach your children, but know that if you remove me for this reason, you are punishing both Mr. Ward and myself for an act of courage that saved a life. You are telling your children that reputation matters more than compassion, that propriety matters more than mercy." The words hung in the air, challenging and clear. Caleb looked around the room, saw people shifting uncomfortably, saw doubt creeping into faces that had been set in judgment. Then he stood too and found himself speaking words he hadn't planned. "I'm just a rancher. Don't have Miss Joe's education or her way with words, but I know right from wrong, and I know I made the right choice that night." He looked at Mrs. Patterson directly. "You can judge me all you want, but leave her out of it. She did nothing but survive. If that's a scandal, then we've lost our way." The church erupted into conversation, people arguing, agreeing, debating. Mayor Gray called for order, but the dam had broken. Caleb reached down, offered Leanne his hand, and helped her back to her seat. She was trembling slightly, but when she looked at him, her eyes shone with gratitude and something deeper. The meeting continued for another hour, voices raised in argument and defense. But slowly, gradually, the tide shifted. Sarah Bennett spoke eloquently about Leanne's dedication to the children. Thomas Gray pointed out that losing a good teacher over something she had no control over seemed unjust. Even some of Mrs. Patterson's supporters began to waver, swayed by the simple truth that a life had been saved. In the end, the vote was close but decisive. Leanne would keep her position as teacher. She would return to the schoolhouse when her leg healed sufficiently. The scandal would fade, as scandals always did, worn away by time and new concerns. As people filed out of the church, several stopped to speak to Leanne, apologies, support, quiet words of encouragement. She accepted them all with grace, though Caleb could see the exhaustion pulling at her. Finally, they were alone outside, the night air cool and clean after the closeness of the church. Stars scattered across the sky above them, indifferent to human drama. "You were magnificent in there," Caleb said quietly. "I was terrified." "Didn't show." She laughed softly, leaning against him as they walked to the wagon. "Thank you for standing with me, for speaking, for everything." Caleb helped her into the seat, then climbed up beside her. But before taking the reins, he turned to face her in the darkness. "Leanne." He stopped, her name feeling strange and right on his tongue. "I need to tell you something." She looked at him, waiting. "These past days, talking with you, watching you recover." He struggled for words, rough rancher's vocabulary failing him. "You've become important to me, more important than I expected, more than is probably wise, given everything." In the starlight, he saw her expression soften. "Caleb," his name and her accent sent warmth through his chest. "You've become important to me too. You saved my life, yes, but more than that, you see me. Not the foreign teacher, not the scandal, just me. That's a rare gift." "So what do we do about it?" She reached up, touched his face gently. "We take it slow. We let the talk die down. We give the town time to forget and forgive." Her hand dropped back to her lap. "And we see where this path leads us." It wasn't a declaration, wasn't a promise, but it was enough. More than enough. Caleb took the reins and guided the wagon through the quiet streets, back to the boarding house where Martha waited with knowing eyes and a warm smile. The crisis had passed. The judgment had been faced and survived. And between them, fragile but growing stronger each day, was something that felt like the beginning of everything. The weeks that followed the town meeting settled into a pattern that felt both natural and precarious, like walking a narrow bridge over deep water. Leanne's leg healed slowly but steadily, the angry red of the wound fading to pink and then to the pale lines of scarring that would mark her forever. She practiced walking every day, leaning less on Caleb's arm with each passing week, though neither of them seemed eager to abandon the excuse for closeness. Caleb found reasons to be in town more often than his ranch strictly required. A supply run that could have waited, a conversation with the mayor about grazing rights, a horse that needed shoeing at the blacksmith 2 doors down from the boarding house. Jack Matthews started giving him knowing looks but never commented, just handled the extra work without complaint. And each time Caleb arrived in Red Hollow Ridge, he made his way to the boarding house where Leanne spent her days reading, preparing lessons for when she could return to the schoolhouse, and watching the street through the parlor window with an expression that suggested she was waiting for something, for someone. "You're going to wear a path in that floor," Martha told Leanne one afternoon, amusement coloring her voice. Caleb had just ridden past, visible through the window, heading toward the general store. Leanne turned from the window, color rising in her cheeks. "I was just looking at the weather. It might rain later." "That's why you've been staring at that perfectly clear sky for the past 10 minutes. Martha set down the mending she'd been working on. "Child, I'm not blind, and neither is anyone else in this town. The way you two look at each other, well, it's a wonder the curtains don't catch fire." "Martha, I'm not scolding, just observing." The older woman's expression softened. "He's a good man, Caleb Ward. Rough around the edges, doesn't have much polish, but his heart's solid. After what he did for you, after how he stood by you through all the gossip, well, a woman could do a lot worse." Leanne returned to the sofa, settling carefully with her leg elevated on a cushion. The position had become familiar over the weeks, though she hated the limitation it represented. "I care for him. More than I probably should, given how little time we've actually known each other. Time doesn't measure everything. Sometimes you know a person's character in a single moment. Sometimes that moment is when they're willing to risk everything to save your life. But what future is there?" Leanne's hands twisted together in her lap, expressing the anxiety she usually kept hidden. I'm a teacher. He's a rancher. I read books in 3 languages. He can barely write his own name. We come from worlds so different we might as well be from different planets. And yet here you are, waiting by the window for the sight of him. Here he is, finding excuses to ride into town just to spend an hour in your company. Martha picked up her mending again, needle flashing in the afternoon light. Different worlds can meet, Leanne. Sometimes they create something entirely new when they do. Before Leanne could respond, the front door opened and Caleb's familiar footsteps sounded in the hall. Her heart did that foolish leap it always did when he appeared, and she smoothed her skirts with hands that trembled slightly. He stopped in the parlor doorway, hat in his hands, hair slightly mussed from the wind. "Afternoon, ladies." "Afternoon, Caleb." Martha stood, gathering her mending with deliberate slowness. "I need to check on the roast in the kitchen. You'll keep Miss Jo company." "Be happy to." Martha left with a smile that suggested she wasn't fooling anyone. Caleb moved into the room, settling into the chair that had become his, positioned close enough for conversation, far enough for propriety. The rules of their interaction had been carefully established over the past weeks. Invisible lines neither of them crossed, despite the growing tension of wanting to. "How's the leg today?" he asked. "Better. I walked to the end of the hall and back this morning without help." Pride colored her voice. "Dr. Brennan says another 2 weeks and I should be able to return to the school, at least for half days." "That's good news." "It is." She paused, studying his face. "You look tired." "Is everything all right at the ranch?" Caleb shrugged, uncomfortable as always when the conversation turned to him. "Spring calving started. Always means long nights and early mornings. Lost a cow yesterday, breech birth, calf didn't make it either. These things happen, but it never gets easier." Leanne's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry. I know you care about your animals. They're my livelihood, but yeah, I care." He turned his hat in his hands, the motion revealing his discomfort with the admission. Probably sounds foolish to someone who works with books and learning. It doesn't sound foolish at all. She leaned forward slightly, wincing at the pull on her healing leg. "You nurture life, same as I do. You just do it with cattle instead of children. There's honor in that work, Caleb. Real honor." The way she said his name with that precise accent and underlying warmth made something in his chest tighten. "I brought you something." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "It's not much, but..." She took it with careful hands, unwrapped it to reveal a book. Not new, the cover worn with use, but the title made her breath catch. Poetry, American poetry. Found it in the general store. Sarah ordered it special from back east, but the customer never claimed it. "Thought you might like it. Help you with..." He gestured vaguely. "Understanding how we talk, I guess, the rhythms and such." Leanne pressed the book to her chest, eyes bright. "This is the kindest gift. Thank you." "Like I said, it's not much. It's perfect." She opened the cover, ran her fingers over the first page. "Will you read to me sometime? I'd like to hear the poems in your voice, learn the proper pronunciation." Caleb's stomach dropped. "Leanne, I can't. I told you, I barely read. You read well enough. I've seen you with the ranch ledgers when you've shown me your work." She looked up at him with complete trust. "Please, I want to learn from you." How could he refuse when she looked at him like that? "All right, but don't expect anything fancy." She smiled, bright and genuine, and Caleb felt that familiar warmth spread through his chest. These moments with her had become the center of his days, the thing he looked forward to through all the hard work and long hours. Just sitting here, talking about nothing and everything, watching expressions chase across her face as she spoke about her students, or the books she loved, or the small observations she'd made about frontier life. They talked until the afternoon faded toward evening, until Martha appeared with tea and the gentle reminder that dinner would be ready soon. Caleb stood reluctantly, knowing he should head back to the ranch before full dark, but wanting to stay, wanting to stretch these hours into something longer. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "I'll be here." Leanne's smile held promise and patience both. The next day brought rain, not the gentle spring shower Leanne had predicted, but a genuine storm that rolled down from the mountains with thunder and lightning that shook the boarding house windows. Caleb arrived anyway, soaked to the skin despite his oilcloth coat, and Martha immediately banished him to the washroom to dry off before he caught his death. When he emerged in borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit, one of Martha's other boarders, a man larger and taller than Caleb, Leon couldn't help but laugh at the sight of him. "Don't," he warned, but his lips twitched with suppressed amusement. "Not a word about the pants." "I wasn't going to say anything about the pants that stop 3 inches above your boots," Leon managed through her laughter. "Or the shirt that looks like you borrowed it from a giant. Martha said it was this, or sit around in a blanket like an old woman. The blanket might have been more dignified." They both dissolved into laughter then, the kind that felt good after weeks of careful propriety and measured conversations. When it finally subsided, Leon wiped her eyes and gestured to the sofa beside her. "Sit with me. The rain's not stopping anytime soon, and I have the poetry book ready." Caleb hesitated. They'd been careful about distance, about maintaining appearances, but the storm had emptied the boarding house, other residents out at work or shopping, Martha busy in the kitchen, and the sofa was large enough for proper space between them. He sat, leaving a careful foot of distance, and Leon handed him the book already open to a marked page. "This one," she said. "It's about the frontier, about wide spaces and endless sky. I want to hear it in your voice." Caleb looked at those words, his reading slow and careful. The poem spoke of prairies and mountains, of loneliness and beauty intertwined. His pronunciation was rough in places, stumbling over unfamiliar words, but Leon listened with complete attention. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Beautiful," she finally whispered. "The way you read it, you understand this land in your bones. I could hear it in your voice. Just describing what's out there, what I see every day. That's what makes it beautiful. You live the poetry even if you don't write it." She shifted slightly, closing some of the distance between them. "Read another?" They spent the afternoon like that, Caleb reading while rain hammered against the windows, and Leon listened with her head tilted back against the sofa. Somewhere in the 3rd or 4th poem, she moved closer, her shoulder nearly touching his. By the 6th poem, her hand had found its way to rest on the sofa between them, close enough that his own hand could have covered it if he dared. He didn't dare. Not yet. But the wanting was there, sharp and undeniable. "Caleb," she said when he paused between poems, her voice soft in the storm-dimmed room. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Anything." "Why did you never marry? A man like you, good, hard-working, kind. Surely women must have shown interest." The question caught him off guard. He set the book aside, staring at his hands. "My brother Thomas was the charming one. Had a way with words, could make anyone laugh. I was always just the quiet one, the serious one. After he died, I threw myself into building the ranch. Didn't have time for courting, didn't know how to talk to women beyond basic pleasantries." He paused, gathering courage. "And I guess I never met anyone who made me want to try. Until now." The last words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Leon's breath caught audibly. "Until now," she repeated, testing the words. "Until you." He turned to face her, saw his own feelings reflected in her dark eyes. "I know I shouldn't say it. Know we're supposed to be taking things slow, letting the talk die down. But Leon, I think about you constantly. Wonder if you're warm enough, if your leg is healing properly, if you're happy or sad or somewhere in between. You've gotten under my skin in a way I can't explain and don't want to fight. I think about you too." Her hand moved, covered his where it rested on his knee. "When I'm alone at night, I remember how you looked that first day, carrying me into the boarding house. How you refused to leave my side during the worst of it. How you stood up in that church and defended me without hesitation." Her fingers tightened on his. "You make me feel safe, Caleb. Safe and seen and valued. That's a rare and precious thing." Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the foundations. In the flickering stormlight, they sat facing each other on the sofa, hands joined, the careful distance between them suddenly feeling like a chasm neither wanted anymore. "I want to kiss you," Caleb said, honesty rough in his voice. "But I won't. Not yet. Not until you're healed, until the town's completely forgotten the scandal, until I can court you properly the way you deserve." "And if I don't want to wait?" Leon's voice trembled slightly. "If I want to claim what we both feel right now?" "Then you'd be braver than me." He lifted her hand, pressed it to his chest where his heart hammered. Feel that? That's what you do to me. But you're worth doing this right, worth being patient for. I won't give the gossips any more ammunition, won't risk your reputation again. Lien's eyes shone with emotion, frustration and understanding, and something that looked like love. You're a better man than any I've ever known. I'm a man who wants you enough to wait until the timing is right. They sat like that as the storm raged outside, hands joined, hearts laid bare, wanting and waiting tangled together. Martha eventually appeared with lamps and the news that Caleb's clothes were dry enough to wear home. He changed reluctantly, emerged to find Lien standing by the window watching the rain, her profile lovely in the lamplight. Be careful riding home, she said without turning. The trails will be muddy. I'll be fine. He paused at the doorway. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. The ride back to the ranch was miserable. Cold rain, slick trails, darkness broken only by occasional lightning. But Caleb barely noticed. His mind was full of Lien, of the feel of her hand in his, of the promises spoken and unspoken. He'd court her properly, earn the town's acceptance, prove himself worthy of her trust and affection. And then, when the time was right, he'd ask her to be his wife. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it settled into his chest like warmth on a cold day, like coming home after a long journey. 2 weeks later, Dr. Brennan officially cleared Lien to return to teaching. The announcement brought mixed reactions from the town. Some genuine joy at having their teacher back, others thinly veiled skepticism about whether she could handle the work after such an injury. Lien ignored the doubters with the same quiet dignity she'd shown throughout her recovery. The morning of her return, Caleb arrived at the boarding house to find her dressed in a crisp shirtwaist and skirt, her hair pinned up with careful precision, a leather satchel packed with books and lesson plans. She looked nervous and excited and absolutely beautiful. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." She accepted his offered arm, her gait still slightly uneven but growing stronger every day. "Thank you for walking me. I know you have work at the ranch. This is more important." They made their way through town as the sun climbed higher, Red Hollow Ridge waking around them. People paused in their morning routines to watch them pass, some smiling, some frowning, all taking note of the rancher escorting the teacher to her schoolhouse. Caleb kept his expression neutral. His pace matched to Lien's careful steps, silently daring anyone to comment. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple wooden building with windows that let in the morning light. Children were already gathering outside, their voices carrying in the clear air. When they saw Lien approaching, a cheer went up. "Miss Joe! Miss Joe's back!" They swarmed around her, careful of her leg, but clearly delighted to see their teacher. Lien's face transformed with joy, all nervousness falling away as she greeted each child by name, asked about their families, listened to their excited chatter about everything they'd missed during her absence. Caleb stepped back, watching the scene with something tight in his throat. This was who she was. Not the foreign woman who'd caused a scandal, not the victim who'd needed saving, but a teacher who loved her students and was loved in return. This was the life he'd fought for, the reason he'd risked everything. And she was magnificent. Lien eventually herded the children inside, but paused at the door to look back at Caleb. "Thank you," she mouthed. He touched his hat brim in acknowledgement, then turned to head back through town. He'd made it perhaps 20 yards when a voice called his name. "Mr. Ward." A word? He turned to find Mrs. Patterson approaching, her expression less hostile than he'd seen in weeks, but still guarded. He braced himself for another lecture about propriety. "Mrs. Patterson, I wanted to apologize." The words came out stiff, clearly difficult for her. "I was wrong about Miss Joe. Watching her with the children just now, she's exactly what this town needs, what those children need. And you were right to save her, regardless of the methods required." Caleb stared at her, genuinely shocked. "I appreciate you saying so. I spoke from fear, not reason. Fear of change, fear of anything that challenged my understanding of how things should be." She clasped her hands together. "I'm trying to do better, to see people for who they are, not just how they fit into my expectations." "That's all any of us can do, ma'am." She nodded, offered a tentative smile, and continued on her way. Caleb watched her go, marveling at the change. Maybe the town really was ready to move past the scandal. Maybe he and Leon could build something real without constantly fighting judgment. The weeks flowed into months. Spring gave way to early summer, the valley turning green with new growth. Leon threw herself into teaching with renewed passion, her students thriving under her patient instruction. Caleb visited town regularly, their courtship conducted in careful public spaces with proper chaperones, walks down Main Street, conversations on Martha's porch, dinners at the boarding house with other residents present. But they also found moments alone. Brief encounters when Caleb would ride out to check a fence line and find Leanne gathering flowers with her students on a nature walk. Quiet conversations on Sunday afternoons when most of the town attended church services they both politely declined. Stolen minutes at the general store when Sarah Bennett would suddenly remember urgent business in the back room, leaving them alone among the dry goods and farming supplies. In those moments, they talked about everything. Leanne told him about her childhood, about growing up in a household that valued education above all else, about the pressure to marry well, and her decision to chart her own path instead. Caleb spoke about his parents' early death, about raising himself and Thomas with help from neighbors, about the Cherokee man named Two Ravens who'd taught him more about the land than any book ever could. They discovered shared loves, starry nights, the smell of sage after rain, the satisfaction of work well done. They found differences too, but ones that complemented rather than divided. Where Leon saw poetry in words, Caleb saw it in the curve of a horse's neck or the flight of a hawk. Where he found peace in silence and solitude, she thrived on conversation and connection. Together, they were becoming something neither had been alone. One evening in late June, Caleb arrived at the boarding house to find Leon sitting on the porch steps, her face troubled. He dismounted quickly, concern sharpening his voice. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." She gestured to the space beside her, and he sat, close enough to feel her warmth. "I received a letter today, from my family." "Bad news?" "Complicated news." She pulled the letter from her pocket, though she didn't unfold it. "They want me to come home, say I've proven my point, had my adventure, and now it's time to return and fulfill my family obligations. There's a man they want me to meet, a merchant's son, well-connected, proper in every way." Caleb's stomach dropped. "What did you tell them?" "I haven't responded yet. I needed to think." She finally looked at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "This is my family, Caleb. They're offering me security, respectability, a return to everything familiar. I'd be foolish to refuse without serious consideration. But you don't want to go." He said it as statement, not question, because he could see the truth in her face. "No, I don't want to go." Her voice broke slightly. "I love teaching here. I love this town despite how it treated me at first. I love the mountains and the wide sky and the way people say exactly what they mean. I love—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I love my life here." "Then stay. It's not that simple, isn't it?" He turned to face her fully. "Leanne, I know I'm not what your family would choose for you. I can't offer you the life they envision, fine houses and servants and social standing. What I can offer is a ranch house that needs work, days of hard labor, winters that'll freeze you to the bone. But I can also offer you honesty, loyalty, and a love that won't quit regardless of what challenges come our way." Her breath caught. "Caleb, I'm in love with you." The words came out rough but certain. "Have been for months, probably since that first night when you looked at me with trust instead of judgment. I wake up thinking about you and fall asleep the same way. You've become part of every plan I make, every dream I have for the future. And if you go back across that ocean, you'll take my heart with you." Tears spilled down Leanne's cheeks, catching the evening light. "I love you too. So much it frightens me sometimes." "Then stay. Choose this life. Choose me. And if my family disowns me, if I lose everything I came from, then you'll have everything you're building here instead." He took her hands, held them gently. "I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise you'll never face anything alone. We'll build our life together, whatever that looks like." Leon looked at their joined hands, at the calluses on his palms and the ink stains on her fingers, at the physical evidence of their different worlds meeting. Then she looked up at him with eyes full of certainty. "Yes," she whispered. Yes, I'll stay. Yes to all of it. Caleb pulled her into his arms then, propriety forgotten, and held her while she cried against his shoulder. Relief and joy and determination flowed through him in equal measure. They'd face her family's disappointment together. They'd weather whatever judgment remained in town. They'd build something real and lasting from the connection forged in crisis and strengthened through patience. When Leanne finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, she was smiling through the tears. I should warn you, my family is very traditional. They won't approve. Mine would have loved you. That's enough for me. And the town? They're barely used to me as the teacher. Making me your wife might start the gossip all over again. Let it start. We'll outlast it. He touched her face gently, thumb brushing away a remaining tear. I'm done waiting for the perfect time, done worrying about what people think. I want to marry you, Leonjo. Want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. Want to give you a home and a life and every bit of love I have. If you'll have me. I'll have you, she said simply. All of you, just as you are. The porch creaked, and they looked up to find Martha standing in the doorway, her eyes suspiciously bright. About time, she said gruffly. I was beginning to think you two would dance around this forever. She smiled at their surprised expressions. Don't look so shocked. Everyone with eyes has known where this was heading since the night you saved her life. You're just finally catching up to what the rest of us already knew. Leon laughed, the sound bright with joy and relief. Caleb found himself grinning, an expression that felt strange and wonderful on his usually serious face. They sat on the porch as the sun set, making plans and dreaming dreams while Red Hollow Ridge settled into evening around them. The path ahead wouldn't be simple. Leanne would need to write to her family, Caleb would need to prepare the ranch for a wife, and the town would undoubtedly have opinions about their union. But they'd faced worse together and survived. They'd face this too, hand in hand, building a future from the ashes of scandal and the strength of love forged in fire. And in that moment, sitting on Martha Hale's porch with Lion's hand in his and stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, Caleb Ward felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years, complete and absolute peace. The morning after their decision brought a clarity that felt almost physical, like the air after a storm has passed. Caleb woke before dawn as always, but instead of the usual heaviness of solitary routine, he felt purpose singing through his veins. Today he would begin preparing his home for the woman who would share it. Today everything changed. He found Jack already in the barn, forking hay to the horses. The older man looked up as Caleb entered, took one look at his face and grinned. You asked her. How do you... Caleb stopped, shook his head. Does everyone in this territory have second sight? Don't need second sight to read a man who's been mooning over a woman for months. About time you made it official. Jack leaned on his pitchfork. She say yes? She did. Smart woman. You planning to do right by her? Actual wedding, not just some handshake arrangement? Caleb felt heat rise in his face. Of course a real wedding, soon as we can arrange it. But first I need to make the house livable for her. It's been a bachelor's place too long. Needs a woman's touch, needs fixing up proper. Jack looked at him with something like approval. I'll handle the ranch work while you sort the house. But Caleb... He paused, choosing words carefully. Miss Jo is educated, refined. Used to finer things than what we've got out here. You sure she knows what she's signing up for? She knows. Caleb thought of Leon's tears the night before, her certainty despite the sacrifice she was making. She's choosing this life with her eyes wide open. My job is to make it the best life I can give her. He spent the morning taking stock of the ranch house with fresh eyes, seeing it as Leon would see it for the first time. The structure was sound. He'd built it himself with Thomas's help years ago, using timber from the mountains and stone from the creek bed. But the inside was sparse, functional, lacking any warmth or comfort beyond basic necessity. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel bare except for dust. The furniture consisted of a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a single armchair near the fire, and shelves holding supplies and cooking implements. His bedroom was equally austere. A bed, a chest for clothes, nothing more. The second bedroom, intended someday for children, stood completely empty. He'd been living like a man just passing through his own life, Caleb realized. existing rather than truly inhabiting this space. That had to change. He started by cleaning, a task he'd neglected far too often, swept the floors until no trace of dirt remained, washed windows until light poured through unstained glass, scrubbed surfaces he'd ignored for months. The physical work felt good, productive, each stroke of the broom an act of preparation for the future. But cleaning wasn't enough. The house needed furniture, curtains, touches that would make it a home rather than just shelter. And for that, he needed help. He rode into Red Hollow Ridge that afternoon and found Sarah Bennett at the general store, sorting through a shipment of fabric that had just arrived from back east. She looked up as he entered, her face breaking into a knowing smile. "Caleb Ward, I heard the news. Congratulations are in order." Word traveled fast in a small town. "Thank you. Actually, I was hoping you could help me with something. Anything for our local hero and his bride-to-be." He explained his need: furniture, curtains, items that would transform the ranch house into something worthy of Leon. Sarah listened with growing enthusiasm, already pulling bolts of fabric from the shelves and suggesting pieces from her catalog. "Now, I don't know Miss Jo's taste exactly," Sarah said, spreading a beautiful blue calico across the counter. "But I've noticed she favors simple elegance over fussy decoration. This fabric would make lovely curtains, cheerful without being overwhelming." Caleb touched the cloth, trying to imagine it in his windows. "I trust your judgment. And Sarah, I need this done quickly. I want the house ready before we marry." "When's the wedding?" "Haven't set a date yet, but soon. Neither of us wants a long engagement." Sarah's eyes softened. "You've both waited long enough, haven't you? Fighting through scandal and judgment just to be together? You deserve happiness, Caleb. Both of you do." They spent the next hour going through catalogs and inventory, selecting pieces Caleb could afford while still making the house welcoming. A proper dining table with 4 chairs, a cushioned sofa for the main room, lamps with glass chimneys instead of his rough metal ones, rugs to warm the floors, curtains in that blue calico and a cream color for variety, small touches, candlesticks, a mirror, a clock for the mantel. The cost made Caleb wince, but he'd been saving for years with little to spend money on. This was what those savings were for: building a life, creating a home, giving Leon something beautiful to walk into instead of the stark bachelor's existence he'd maintained. "It'll take a few weeks for some items to arrive," Sarah warned, "but I can have the curtains sewn up locally and some furniture pieces are already in the warehouse. We'll get you sorted, Caleb. Don't you worry." He left the general store with lightness in his chest, planning already forming for how to arrange everything, where each piece would go. But his next stop sobered him quickly. Mayor Gray's office was a small room at the back of the town hall, cramped with papers and maps and the accumulated business of governing a frontier community. The mayor looked up from his desk as Caleb knocked on the open door. "Caleb, come in. Sit down. I assume this is about Miss Jo?" Word really does travel. Caleb settled into the chair across from Gray's desk. "We want to marry, soon. I'm here to ask about the legal requirements." "Requirements are simple enough. You're both of age, both free to marry. Just need to file the intention with me. Wait the required 10 days, then any authorized person can perform the ceremony." Gray leaned back in his chair, studying Caleb. "But I suspect you're here for more than just the legal formalities. I want your blessing, not as mayor, as someone who cares about this town and the people in it. I know there's still talk about what happened, still some who think Leanne shouldn't be teaching. Our marriage might stir that up again." "It might," Gray acknowledged. "It also might finally put the matter to rest. Hard to gossip about scandal when the parties involved are respectably married and building a good life together." He paused, then smiled. "You have my blessing, Caleb. More than that, you have my admiration. What you did took courage, and what you're doing now takes even more. Building a life across cultural differences in a place that's not always tolerant of difference, that's brave work. Or foolish work. Sometimes they're the same thing." Gray pulled a form from his desk drawer. "Let's make it official. You and Miss Jo can come in tomorrow to file the intention. After that, it's just a matter of planning the ceremony." Caleb left the mayor's office feeling another piece fall into place. The legal path was clear, the blessing secured. Now he just needed to tell Leanne all the plans taking shape. He found her at the schoolhouse as the afternoon lessons ended, surrounded by children showing her their work. She glanced up as he appeared in the doorway, and her face transformed with a smile that made his heart stutter. The children noticed his arrival and immediately began pestering him with questions about the ranch, about his horses, about when he'd bring them out to see the new calves. "Next week," Leon promised, rescuing him. "Mr. Ward has generously offered to host a field trip where you'll all learn about ranching. But right now he needs to speak with me, so off you go. Study your reading tonight. We'll discuss it tomorrow." The children dispersed with the chaos of youth, leaving Caleb and Leanne alone in the small schoolhouse. Afternoon light slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes and the chalkboard covered in her neat handwriting. She moved toward him, still favoring her healing leg slightly, but moving with increasing confidence. "You've been busy," she said. "I can see it in your face." "Lots to do. Preparing the house, arranging with the mayor, ordering supplies." He caught her hands, held them gently. "I want everything perfect for you." "Caleb, I don't need perfect. I just need you. You deserve both." He drew her closer, propriety be damned since they were alone and engaged. "Come out to the ranch tomorrow. I want to show you the house, get your opinion on what else it needs. It's going to be your home too. You should have a say in how it looks." Excitement sparked in her eyes. "I'd love to see it. I've tried to imagine what your life is like out there, but imagination only goes so far." "It's rough country, Leon. Beautiful, but harsh. The house is small compared to what you're probably used to. The work is hard. The isolation can be challenging. I want you to see it all before we make final plans. Make sure you really understand what you're choosing." She touched his face, the gesture tender. "I'm choosing you. Everything else is just details we'll figure out together." They filed the marriage intention with Mayor Gray the next morning, Leon's hand trembling slightly as she signed her name in the careful script she'd learned as a child. The 10-day waiting period felt simultaneously too long and too short. Time to prepare, but also time to worry, to second-guess, to wonder if they were moving too fast. The ride out to Caleb's ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country Leon had ever seen. They followed a creek that wound through sage-covered hills, mountains rising purple and magnificent in the distance. Hawks circled overhead, and once she spotted a small herd of pronghorn bounding across the grassland with impossible grace. "It's stunning," she breathed. "I had no idea it was this beautiful out here." "Wait until you see it in different seasons. Winter can be brutal, but when the snow covers everything, it's like living in a painting. Spring brings wildflowers that carpet the hills. Fall turns the aspens gold." Pride colored his voice. "This land, it gets in your blood, becomes part of who you are." The ranch buildings came into view. Barn, corrals, the small house nestled against a rise that sheltered it from the worst winds. Modest but well-built, everything speaking of care and hard work. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, and she stood taking it all in while he watched her with barely concealed anxiety. "The house needs work," he started, but she was already walking toward it, drawn by curiosity. Inside, she found exactly what she expected, a functional bachelor's space with potential for so much more. She moved through the rooms slowly, touching surfaces, looking out windows, imagining the life they could build here. The main room had good light and that beautiful fireplace. The bedroom was small, but cozy. The empty second room made her heart skip. She could already see it filled with a cradle, children's things, the family they might build together. "What do you think?" Caleb asked from behind her, voice tight with worry. She turned to face him, saw the vulnerability in his expression. "I think it's perfect. Or it will be, once we make it ours together." Relief flooded his features. "I've ordered furniture, curtains, things to make it more comfortable. Sarah's helping coordinate everything, but I wanted your input on the rest. Colors, arrangements, anything you want to add. Show me what you've planned." They spent the afternoon going through his purchases, Leon making suggestions that Caleb immediately noted. She wanted books, shelves in the main room for the volumes she'd collected, a reading space near the best light. She suggested a small desk where she could prepare lessons during evenings. Asked about a garden plot where she might grow vegetables and herbs, maybe even some flowers to brighten the stark landscape. With each request, Caleb's plans expanded. He'd build the bookshelves himself, construct the desk from lumber he had stored in the barn. Jack could help break ground for a garden plot, and Sarah would know where to source seeds. The house was transforming in his mind from shelter to home, each addition a gift to the woman who'd chosen to share his life. As the sun began its descent, they sat on the porch steps together, watching the light paint the mountains gold and crimson. Leanne leaned against Caleb's shoulder, comfortable in a way she'd never been with anyone else. "I wrote to my family last night," she said quietly. "Told them about you, about my decision to stay and marry. I tried to be honest about what I'm giving up and what I'm gaining." "How did you explain me?" "I told them you're a rancher who saved my life at considerable personal cost, that you're honest and kind and brave, that you see me as a person worth loving, not just a daughter to be married off advantageously." She paused. "I told them I love you more than I ever thought possible." Caleb's arm tightened around her. "Think they'll understand?" "Probably not. They'll see it as me throwing away every advantage, choosing hardship over comfort. But I've made my choice, and I can live with their disappointment." She looked up at him. "Can you live with being married to a woman whose family may never accept you?" "I can live with anything as long as you're beside me." The simplicity of the statement, the absolute certainty in his voice, made tears prick Leanne's eyes. She'd been raised to value education, refinement, social standing, had been taught that a good marriage meant security and status, that love was secondary to practical considerations. But sitting here with Caleb, watching the sunset paint the world in impossible colors, she understood that her parents had been wrong. Love wasn't secondary, it was everything. The 10 days passed in a blur of preparation. Caleb worked from dawn to past dark getting the house ready, building furniture, hanging curtains, transforming the space with help from Jack and several townspeople who'd warmed to the idea of the wedding. Sarah organized a community effort to provide household items, quilts sewn by the church ladies, preserved foods from various gardens, small luxuries donated by families grateful for Leanne's teaching. Even Mrs. Patterson contributed, her offering a beautiful set of embroidered pillowcases that spoke of genuine skill and effort. She presented them to Leanne with an awkward formality that gradually softened into something like friendship. "I was wrong about you," she said simply. "About what happened, about who you are. I hope you'll accept these as an apology and a welcome." Leanne accepted with grace that made Caleb's chest tight with pride. She'd won them over, not through grand gestures, but through quiet persistence and genuine kindness. The town that had once judged her now celebrated her upcoming marriage, seeing it as validation rather than scandal. Martha Hale threw herself into wedding preparations with the enthusiasm of a general planning a campaign. She coordinated with Sarah on Leanne's dress, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored silk that Sarah had special ordered from San Francisco. Organized a reception at the boarding house since Caleb's ranch was too far for most guests to travel. Bullied Pastor Williams into keeping his ceremony brief and focused on the couple rather than lengthy moralizing. "This is your day," she told Leanne firmly, "not the town's opportunity to gawk or judge. We're going to make it beautiful and meaningful and exactly what you both deserve." 3 days before the wedding, a telegram arrived for Leanne. Caleb was with her at the boarding house when Samuel delivered it, his face troubled. Leanne's hands shook as she opened the thin paper, read the message in silence. "What is it?" Caleb asked, though dread already whispered the answer. "My family. They're disowning me." Her voice was remarkably steady. "My father says if I proceed with this marriage, I'll no longer be considered his daughter. My name will be removed from the family records. I'll have no inheritance, no claim to anything I left behind." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Caleb reached for her, but she stepped back, needing space to process the enormity of what she'd just lost. "I knew this might happen," she continued, still in that too calm voice. "Knew they might choose tradition over their daughter, but seeing it in writing—" Her composure cracked, tears spilling over. "It hurts more than I expected." Caleb crossed to her then, pulled her into his arms despite her initial resistance. She fought for a moment before surrendering to grief, sobbing against his chest while he held her, and murmured useless comforts. What could he say? That it would be okay? That her family would come around? He didn't know if either was true. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry you're losing them because of me." She pulled back enough to look at him, eyes red but fierce. "Not because of you. Because of their inability to see past their own expectations. Because they value propriety more than my happiness. She wiped her face with shaking hands. It hurts, but it doesn't change my decision. I'm still marrying you, Caleb Ward. In 3 days, I'm going to stand in front of this whole town and pledge my life to yours. You're sure? Even after this? Especially after this. They've made their choice. Now I'm making mine. The determination in her voice, the steel beneath the tears, reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. She was brave in ways he'd never be, facing losses he couldn't imagine with a strength that humbled him. We'll be each other's family, he promised. You, me, whatever children we might have. We'll build something good, Leon. Something worth what you're sacrificing. I know we will. That night, alone in his ranch house, Caleb lay awake worrying. The weight of what Liane was giving up pressed on him. Her family, her inheritance, her connection to everything she'd known before. And for what? A rancher who could barely read? A small house in the middle of nowhere? A life of hard work and uncertain futures? Was he being selfish, letting her make this choice? Should he release her, give her the chance to reconcile with her family before it was too late? But even as the doubts circled, he knew the truth. Releasing her would break them both. They'd found something rare and precious together, something worth fighting for. And if her family couldn't see that, couldn't value her happiness over their traditions, then they didn't deserve her anyway. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, late summer warmth tempering the mountain breeze. Caleb dressed in new clothes Sarah had ordered for him. Dark trousers, a white shirt, a vest that felt strange across his chest. He fumbled with the tie until Jack took pity and helped him, the older man's hands surprisingly deft. You look respectable, Jack said with approval, almost civilized. Don't get used to it. Wouldn't dream of it, but for today you clean up nice. Jack clapped him on the shoulder. Nervous? Terrified. Good. Means you understand what you're taking on. Marriage isn't easy, even when everything's going right. But you and Miss Jo, you've already been through fire together. That counts for something. They rode into town together, arriving at the church where townspeople were already gathering. Caleb felt their eyes on him as he entered, felt the weight of their judgment and approval mixed. But then he saw Martha at the front of the church, saw Sarah arranging flowers, saw Mayor Gray standing ready to officiate, and the anxiety eased slightly. These people were on their side, would celebrate this union, support it, help them build the life they were choosing. Samuel appeared at his elbow. She's ready. She wanted me to tell you she's ready and she loves you. The simple message steadied Caleb completely. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. The ceremony was meant to start at 2 o'clock, but time seemed to slow and accelerate randomly. One moment Caleb was standing at the front of the church trying not to fidget. The next the doors were opening and Leanne was walking down the aisle on Martha's arm since her own father had abandoned his role. She looked ethereal in the cream silk dress, her dark hair pinned up with flowers Sarah had provided, her face radiant despite the tears glistening in her eyes. Their gazes locked, and Caleb felt everything else fall away. The townspeople, the church, the anxiety. None of it mattered compared to the woman walking toward him with love and trust shining in her expression. Martha placed Lyon's hand in Caleb's, squeezed both their shoulders, then stepped back to let them face each other before the assembled community. Mayor Gray opened his book, cleared his throat, and began the ceremony. His words washed over Caleb in a blur, something about commitment and love, about choosing to build a life together, about the sacred nature of the vows they were about to speak. Caleb barely heard it, his entire focus on Leon's face, on the way her fingers trembled in his, on the smile that curved her lips despite everything she'd lost to reach this moment. Caleb Ward, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward? I do. The words came out strong, certain, carrying every bit of the promise he was making. Leonjo, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward? I do. Her voice was clear, unshakable, declaring her choice to everyone present. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory, I declare you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. He'd imagined this moment for weeks, but the reality surpassed anything his imagination had conjured. Caleb drew Lion close, mindful of the watching crowd, but unable to restrain the depth of feeling as their lips met. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands coming up to frame his face. and for that perfect moment, they were the only two people in the world. When they finally pulled apart, the church erupted in applause. People stood, calling out congratulations and good wishes. Sarah was crying openly, Martha beaming with satisfaction. Even Mrs. Patterson was smiling, her earlier judgment replaced with genuine happiness. Caleb looked at his wife, and saw his own wonder reflected in her eyes. They'd done it. Against gossip and scandal, against family disapproval and cultural difference, they'd chosen each other and made it official. The reception at the boarding house was a joyful chaos of food and music and celebration. Someone had brought a fiddle, and impromptu dancing filled Martha's front room. Children ran underfoot, excited by the festive atmosphere. Neighbors brought gifts, practical items for the household, preserved foods to see them through the coming winter, small luxuries that spoke of community support. Leon moved through it all with grace, accepting congratulations and deflecting the occasional inappropriate question about wedding night expectations. Caleb stayed close, protective even in celebration, making sure she wasn't overwhelmed by the attention. As the sun began to set, they slipped away from the party and walked to the wagon Caleb had prepared. Their belongings, Leon's books and clothes, combined with items from the boarding house and wedding gifts, filled the back. This was it. The moment they left Red Hollow Ridge as husband and wife and traveled to the ranch that would be their home. "Ready?" Caleb asked, offering his hand to help her onto the seat. "More than ready." They drove through the gathering dusk, the sounds of celebration fading behind them. The ride that had taken an hour that afternoon now stretched longer, neither of them in a hurry to reach their destination. They had the rest of their lives, after all. Tonight was just the beginning. The ranch appeared like a promise in the darkness, lamplight glowing in the windows where Jack had prepared the house for their arrival. Caleb lifted Leon from the wagon, held her for a moment just looking at her in the starlight. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ward." She smiled, the title still new and strange and wonderful. "Take me inside, husband. Show me our life." He carried her over the threshold in the old tradition, set her gently on her feet in the main room that had been transformed in his absence. Fresh flowers in jars on the table, the new furniture arranged invitingly, their combined belongings making the space feel lived in and welcoming. Jack had even left a pot of stew warming on the stove, a gesture of friendship that made Caleb's throat tight, but neither of them was thinking about food. They stood in the center of their home, hands joined, hearts racing with the knowledge of what came next. The intimacy they'd avoided for months was now their right, their privilege, their choice. "I love you," Leon whispered, "whatever comes, whatever we face. I love you, Caleb Ward." "And I love you, Leon Ward." He drew her close, felt her melt against him. Now and always. The night stretched before them, full of promise and discovery, and the simple joy of no longer having to hold back. Outside, the mountains stood eternal under stars that had witnessed countless other beginnings. Inside, two people who'd found each other through crisis and courage began writing the next chapter of their shared story. And it was only just beginning. The first morning of married life arrived with birdsong and the soft golden light that comes just after dawn. Leon woke slowly, disoriented for a moment by unfamiliar surroundings before memory returned in a warm rush. The ranch house, her home now, and beside her, still sleeping, the man who'd become her husband. She studied Caleb in the quiet morning light, seeing him without the guardedness he usually carried. His face was softer in sleep, the worry lines smoothed away, dark lashes resting against weathered cheeks. One arm was draped across her waist in unconscious possession, as if even in dreams he needed to know she was there. Love swelled in her chest, so fierce it almost hurt. This man had saved her life, defended her honor, stood beside her through scandal and judgment, had offered her everything he possessed without reservation or condition. And now they had forever to build something beautiful from the foundation they'd laid. Caleb's eyes opened, found her watching him, and his expression transformed with wonder. "You're real," he murmured. "I half thought I'd wake up and find I'd dreamed the whole thing." "Very real." She touched his face, feeling the morning stubble rough against her palm. "And very much your wife." He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "How did I get this lucky?" "I ask myself the same thing." She shifted closer, savoring the warmth of him, the solid presence that made her feel safe in ways she'd never experienced before. What happens now? On a normal morning, I mean. What would you usually be doing? Caleb groaned. On a normal morning, I'd have been up an hour ago feeding animals, checking fences, doing the 100 things a ranch requires. Jack's probably wondering if I died in my sleep. Then we should get up. I don't want to disrupt your work. The work can wait a little longer. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. This is more important. You're more important. They stayed like that for another few minutes, luxuriating in the simple intimacy of being together without the constraints that had governed them for months. But eventually duty called, and Caleb reluctantly extracted himself from the bed to begin his day. Leon watched him dress, fascinated by the routine, the worn work clothes so different from the wedding finery, the practiced efficiency of someone who'd performed these motions thousands of times. He caught her watching and smiled, a rare expression that made him look younger. You're staring. I'm learning. This is my life now too. I want to understand all of it. Something shifted in his expression, a tenderness that made her breath catch. Come with me this morning. I'll show you the ranch, introduce you to the animals. You should know what I do out here, where I am when I'm working. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, pulling her hair back in a practical braid. They ate a quick breakfast of the bread and preserves left by well-wishers, then stepped out into a morning so beautiful it seemed impossible. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and pine from the distant mountains. Dew sparkled on the grass, and the sky stretched endless and blue overhead. Jack was already at the barn, and his knowing grin when he saw them made Leon blush. Morning, newlyweds? Sleep well? Well enough, Caleb said, his own color rising. This is Leon, my wife. Leon, this is Jack Matthews, my foreman, and the man who keeps this place running when I'm too distracted to think straight. Jack swept off his hat in an old-fashioned gesture of respect. Mrs. Ward, it's good to have you here officially. This old bachelor needed someone to civilize him. I'm not sure I'm up to that task, Leon said with a smile, but I'll do my best. Caleb showed her everything, the barn where horses nickered greetings, the chicken coop where she collected eggs with delight, the corrals where cattle grazed contentedly. He explained the work of each season, the challenges and rewards, the careful balance required to survive in this harsh but beautiful land. Leon listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed her quick mind, already thinking about how she could contribute. I could keep the accounts, she offered as they walked back toward the house, track expenses and income, manage the business side. And the garden, I meant what I said about wanting to grow things. Vegetables would reduce our costs and I could preserve food for winter. You don't have to work like a ranch hand, Leon. You're a teacher. That's important work. I can be both. Teach during the day, help here in the evenings and weekends. I want to be part of this, Caleb. Full partners, remember? He looked at her with such profound gratitude that she knew she'd said exactly the right thing. Partners, he agreed, in everything. The days settled into a rhythm that felt both new and timeless. Leon continued teaching at the schoolhouse, riding into town each morning in the wagon Caleb had acquired for her use. The children were fascinated by her married status, peppering her with questions she deflected with gentle humor. She returned each afternoon to the ranch, where she threw herself into making the house truly theirs. She arranged her books on the shelves Caleb built, creating a small library that transformed the main room, planted the garden with seeds Sarah provided, her hands learning the feel of earth and the satisfaction of nurturing growth. Took over the cooking with recipes that blended her knowledge of Eastern flavors with the ingredients available on the frontier. The house began to smell like a home. Bread baking, stew simmering, the fresh scent of herbs drying in bunches from the rafters. Caleb would come in from his work to find her at the stove or bent over the accounts, and the sight never failed to fill him with wonder. This was his life now, coming home to a wife who greeted him with a smile and a kiss, who asked about his day and shared stories from her own, who sat with him in the evenings reading aloud while he worked on small repairs or simply listened to her voice. They learned each other through the small intimacies of shared life, discovered that Leon was terrible at mornings but came alive in the evenings, while Caleb functioned best at dawn and struggled to stay awake past 9. Found that they both loved storms, sitting on the porch to watch lightning paint the mountains. Learned to navigate disagreements with patience and honesty, understanding that different perspectives could strengthen rather than divide them. 3 weeks into their marriage, a letter arrived that changed everything. Leanne collected the mail when she went to town for teaching, usually finding nothing more interesting than agricultural circulars or invoices from suppliers. But this day brought an envelope with foreign stamps, addressed in handwriting she recognized instantly. Her hands shook as she opened it, standing in the schoolhouse after the children had left. The letter was from her younger sister, written in the careful script they'd both learned as children. Dearest Leanne, I write this in secret, knowing Father would forbid contact if he knew, but I cannot bear the silence between us. I need you to know that while Father stands firm in his decision, Mother weeps for you nightly. She keeps your photograph hidden in her dresser, takes it out when Father is away to trace your face with her fingers. I miss you terribly. The house feels empty without your laughter, your constant questions, your books scattered everywhere. Father has arranged a marriage for me with the merchant's son who was intended for you. He's kind enough, but I feel I'm living the life that should have been yours, and it sits uneasily. I don't write to ask you to come back. Your letters before the final break made clear how happy you are with your rancher husband. I write only to tell you that you are loved, you are missed, and whatever Father says, you will always be my sister. Please write to me. Tell me about your life, your husband, the teaching you love so much. Let me know you through your words, even if we cannot be together. With all my love, Leanne read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before carefully folding it and tucking it into her pocket. The wound of her family's rejection, partially healed by the joy of marriage and new life, suddenly felt raw again. She'd gained so much, but the loss was real too. She managed to compose herself before driving home, not wanting Caleb to see her upset. But he knew her too well now, read the distress in the set of her shoulders the moment she stepped down from the wagon. What happened? She tried to smile, to deflect. Nothing, just a long day. Leanne. He took her hands, held them gently. Talk to me. So she told him about the letter, about her sister's words, about the renewed grief of separation from her family. Caleb listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled as she spoke. I'm sorry, he said when she finished. I know this is because of me, because of the choice you made to marry me. Don't. She squeezed his hands fiercely. Don't take that burden on yourself. This is my family's doing, not yours. You've given me nothing but love and support. But still, if there was a way to mend things, to help you reconnect with them, there isn't. My father is a proud man who sees my choice as a fundamental rejection of everything he values. No amount of explanation will change that. She paused, then added more softly, but maybe I can maintain some connection with May, through letters at least. Would that be all right? Of course it's all right. She's your sister. I'd never ask you to cut ties with someone you love. He pulled her close, let her rest against his chest. Write to her. Tell her about our life here. Maybe through your words, your family will come to understand what you found was worth the sacrifice. That night, Leanne sat at the small desk Caleb had built and composed a response to her sister. She wrote about the ranch, about the endless sky and the way mountains changed color with the light, about her students and their eagerness to learn, about the community that had initially judged her but now accepted her, and about Caleb, his quiet strength, his unexpected tenderness, the way he made her feel seen and valued in ways she'd never experienced. She wrote honestly about the challenges too, the hard work of frontier life, the isolation that could be overwhelming, the cultural differences that sometimes created misunderstanding. But through it all, she emphasized the happiness she'd found, the rightness of the choice she'd made. The letter became a regular practice. May would write with news from home, carefully avoiding topics that might hurt while sharing stories of daily life. Yen would respond with tales from Red Hollow Ridge, building a bridge between her old world and new through careful words and sisterly love. The correspondence couldn't replace the relationship they'd had, but it provided connection, a lifeline to the family she'd left behind. As autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Lion discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but waited until she was certain before telling Caleb. The night she finally shared the news, she found him in the barn checking on a mare who was close to foaling. He looked up as she entered, smiled that private smile he saved just for her. Everything all right? Better than all right. She moved closer, nervous despite knowing his reaction would be joy. "Caleb, I'm going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby." For a moment he simply stared at her, the words not quite registering. Then understanding dawned and his face transformed with wonder and something close to awe. "A baby? You're sure?" "I'm sure. Dr. Brennan confirmed it this morning. He says everything looks healthy, that the baby should come sometime in late spring." Caleb closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, lifted her off her feet in a careful embrace. "A baby," he breathed into her hair. "Leon, we're going to have a baby." She laughed through happy tears, holding him tight. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased. I don't have words for what I am." He set her down gently, immediately anxious. "Should you be standing? Do you need to sit down? What did the doctor say about Caleb?" She touched his face, stopping the flood of worried questions. "I'm pregnant, not fragile. Dr. Brennan says I can continue teaching and my normal activities for several more months. I'm healthy and strong. But the ride to town every day, the work around the ranch, all fine, within reason. I'll be careful, I promise. But I'm not going to spend the next 6 months wrapped in cotton." She paused, then added more softly, "I'm happy about this, Caleb. Nervous too, but so happy. A child of our own to love and raise." He pulled her close again, more gently this time, and she felt him trembling slightly. "I want to be a good father. Better than mine was. More present than he could be before he died. I want our child to know they're loved every single day. You'll be wonderful. I've seen how gentle you are with the animals, how patient. Those same qualities will make you an excellent father." That night they lay in bed talking about the future, making plans and dreaming dreams. The empty second bedroom would become a nursery. They'd need a cradle, baby clothes, all the small necessities of caring for an infant. Len would need to arrange for a substitute teacher when the time came, though the school board had already assured her the position would wait for her return. "Have you thought about names?" Caleb asked, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Some. For a boy, maybe Thomas, after your brother?" His breath caught. "You'd do that? He was important to you, and in some ways, his death led to you saving my life. You learned from losing him what to do when you found me." She covered his hand with hers. "It seems fitting to honor his memory. And for a girl? I was thinking May, after my sister. Or maybe something that bridges both our cultures, a name that sounds beautiful in English but has meaning in my language too." They talked late into the night, the conversation meandering from names to nursery arrangements to the kind of parents they hoped to be. Caleb shared stories about his own childhood, the lessons his mother had taught him before she died. Leon spoke about growing up in a household that valued education and respect, about wanting to give their child the best of both worlds. As winter settled over the ranch, Lion's pregnancy became visible. The townspeople responded with overwhelming support, the ladies organizing to sew baby clothes and provide advice. Sarah ordered supplies from back east, soft blankets, tiny gowns, a beautiful cradle that made Leon cry when it arrived. Even Mrs. Patterson softened completely, bringing over her own children's outgrown items with stories about motherhood that were surprisingly helpful. The school board agreed that Lion could teach through the end of the year before taking leave for the baby's birth. She threw herself into preparing her students for the transition, training a young woman from town to take over temporarily. The children were fascinated by her growing belly, asking innocent questions that made her laugh and occasionally blush. But the winter also brought challenges. Snow fell heavily, isolating the ranch for days at a time. Leon struggled with the cold, unused to temperatures that dropped so dramatically. She missed teaching during the weeks when traveling to town was impossible, felt the isolation more keenly than she'd expected. Caleb worried constantly, seeing her unhappiness even when she tried to hide it. One particularly difficult evening, when snow piled against the windows and wind howled around the house, he found her crying quietly in the rocking chair they'd acquired for the nursery. "What's wrong? Is it the baby? Are you in pain?" "No, nothing like that." She wiped her eyes, embarrassed to be caught in a moment of weakness. "I'm just feeling sorry for myself, missing teaching, missing having people to talk to besides you and Jack, feeling trapped by this endless winter." He knelt beside her chair, took her hands. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't the life you imagined. Stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. She managed a watery smile. I chose this, remember? Chose you. Chose this life. That doesn't mean it's always easy, but it's still what I want. What can I do to help? She thought for a moment, then said, Read to me? Like we used to in the beginning. Your voice helps. Makes me feel less alone. So Caleb read to her from the poetry book he'd given her months ago, his rough voice stumbling over unfamiliar words but carrying love in every syllable. Leanne closed her eyes and listened, letting the sound wash over her, finding comfort in his presence, even when the world outside felt hostile and strange. The worst of winter passed, and with spring came renewed energy. Leanne returned to teaching as the snow melted, her pregnancy now advanced enough that she tired easily but manageable with careful pacing. The students welcomed her back with enthusiasm, and she threw herself into the final weeks before her leave with determination. She was at the schoolhouse on a warm April afternoon when the first labor pains struck. They started as a dull ache she initially dismissed as normal pregnancy discomfort, but within an hour the pain had intensified, coming in waves that made her grip the edge of her desk for support. The students noticed, their young faces creasing with worry. Miss Joe, are you all right? I'm fine, she managed, though sweat had broken out on her forehead. I need someone to fetch Dr. Brennan and send word to my husband at the ranch. The oldest boy ran for the doctor while a girl dashed to find someone to ride to Caleb's ranch. Leanne lowered herself carefully into her chair, trying to breathe through the contractions that were coming faster than she'd expected. First babies were supposed to take time, weren't they? But her body seemed to have other plans. Sarah Bennett arrived first, summoned by one of the children, taking charge with the calm efficiency of a woman who'd helped birth several of her own. She cleared the schoolhouse of students, sent them home with instructions to tell their parents what was happening, then focused on Leanne. How far apart are the pains? Maybe 5 minutes? They started less than an hour ago, but they're getting stronger fast. Sarah's expression tightened. Dr. Brennan is out at the Morrison Ranch, a difficult birth. He might not make it back for hours. Fear spiked through Leanne's chest. But the baby is coming too fast. Something's wrong. Nothing's wrong yet. You're just moving quickly. Some women do, especially with all the work you've been doing. Your body's strong. Sarah squeezed her hand. Martha Hale has delivered more babies than the doctor. I've sent for her. She'll know what to do. Martha arrived within minutes, bringing supplies and a capable calm that immediately steadied Leanne. She examined the situation with experienced hands, then nodded with satisfaction. Baby's positioned right. Everything looks good. You're just in a hurry to meet your child. She met Leanne's frightened gaze directly. I've got you, dear. You're going to be fine. This baby is going to be fine. Trust me. Another contraction hit, stronger than the others, and Leanne cried out despite trying to stay quiet. Through the pain, she heard hoofbeats outside, then Caleb's voice calling her name with barely controlled panic. He burst through the schoolhouse door, wild-eyed and breathless, crossing to her in 3 long strides. Leanne, I'm here. I've got you. His presence steadied her more than any medicine could have. She gripped his hand as another wave of pain crashed through her, feeling his strength anchor her. The baby's coming, she gasped. Too fast, too soon. Right on time, Martha corrected firmly. Babies come when they're ready, and this one's ready now. Caleb, help me get her comfortable. We're having a baby today. The next hours blurred together in a haze of pain and effort. Martha coached her through each contraction, Sarah provided cool cloths and encouragement, and Caleb stayed beside her throughout, letting her grip his hand hard enough to leave marks, murmuring words of love and support, even when she was too lost in labor to fully hear them. The schoolhouse, usually filled with children's voices and learning, became a birthing room. Late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in gold, and as the light began to fade toward evening, Leanne felt a final overwhelming urge to push. That's it, Martha encouraged. One more, just like that. Baby's almost here. Leanne bore down with everything she had, Caleb's hand crushing in her grip, and suddenly the pressure released. A moment of stunned silence, then the sharp cry of a newborn filled the air. It's a girl, Martha announced, her voice thick with emotion. A beautiful, healthy girl. She placed the baby on Leanne's chest, and the world narrowed to the tiny person now resting against her. Dark hair, perfect features, lungs that worked beautifully judging by the volume of her cries. Leanne touched her daughter's face with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by love so fierce it took her breath away. "Caleb, look, we have a daughter." He was staring at the baby with an expression of absolute wonder, tears tracking down his face without apparent awareness. "She's perfect. She's absolutely perfect." Their daughter quieted at the sound of his voice, her dark eyes opening to study this new world she'd entered. For a moment, the three of them existed in a bubble separate from everything else, parents and child, a family complete. Martha worked efficiently to deliver the afterbirth and ensure Leanne was healing properly, her movements practiced but gentle. Sarah cleaned the baby with warm water, wrapping her in the soft blanket they'd brought from the ranch. Outside, word had spread through town, and people began gathering to offer congratulations and support. But inside the schoolhouse, Caleb and Leanne focused only on their daughter, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at each perfect detail. She had Caleb's strong chin and Leanne's delicate nose, a combination of both parents that seemed to bridge the cultures they came from. "What should we name her?" Caleb asked softly. Leanne had thought about this question for months, considered dozens of options, but looking at her daughter now, only one name felt right. Hope. Because that's what she represents. Hope for the future, hope that love can overcome any obstacle, hope that two very different people can create something beautiful together. Hope Ward. Caleb tested the name, then smiled. "It's perfect. She's perfect. You're perfect." Martha and Sarah eventually convinced them to move to the boarding house, where Leanne could rest properly and the baby could be settled. Caleb carried his wife and daughter through town as the sun set, surrounded by well-wishers who'd gathered to celebrate the birth. The schoolhouse birth would become one of the town's favorite stories, the teacher who'd survived scandal and Snakebite now bringing new life into the community that had come to love her. At the boarding house, Martha set up Leanne in the best room, refusing to hear arguments about payment. "You've given this town more than you know," she said firmly, "teaching our children, showing us what real courage looks like. Let us take care of you now." The first night with their daughter was a revelation. Hope nursed hungrily, slept fitfully, woke crying for reasons they couldn't always discern. Caleb and Leanne took turns walking her, soothing her, marveling at how someone so small could be so demanding. They were exhausted and overwhelmed and utterly in love. As dawn broke on their first full day as parents, Caleb found Leanne nursing Hope by the window, morning light painting them both in soft gold. He stood watching them for a long moment, this woman who'd changed his life completely, and the daughter they'd created together. "What are you thinking?" Leanne asked softly, noticing his gaze. "That I never imagined I could be this happy. That you and Hope are everything I didn't know I needed." He crossed to them, wrapped his arms carefully around both wife and daughter. "Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me. Thank you for her. Thank you for saving me all those months ago. For seeing past the scandal to who I really was. For being brave enough to love someone so different from yourself." They stayed like that as the sun climbed higher, a family of three now, bound by love and choice and the courage to build something new from broken expectations and discarded rules. When they finally returned to the ranch a week later, the house felt different. The nursery that had stood empty now held a cradle with a sleeping baby. The quiet that had sometimes felt oppressive was now filled with small sounds. Hope's breathing, her occasional whimpers, the rustle of blankets as she shifted. Leanne struggled with the adjustment more than she'd expected. The exhaustion of caring for a newborn combined with recovery from childbirth left her depleted in ways teaching never had. She'd been independent and capable, and now she found herself dependent on Caleb for help with basic tasks, overwhelmed by the demands of this tiny person. One particularly difficult night when Hope wouldn't stop crying and Leanne couldn't figure out why, she broke down completely. "I don't know what I'm doing," she sobbed to Caleb. "I can teach 20 children without breaking a sweat, but I can't figure out what my own daughter needs. What kind of mother am I?" "You're a new mother, learning just like Hope is learning to be in this world." He took the baby, gently rocking her while Leanne composed herself. "We're both learning, and it's okay to struggle. It doesn't mean you're failing. But you seem to handle everything so easily. I delivered a breached calf last week and cried about it after. I'm not handling anything easily. I'm just pretending better." He looked at her with profound tenderness. "We're partners, remember? When you're struggling, I help. When I struggle, you help. That's how we survive this. She managed a watery laugh. Some partnership. You're doing all the helping right now. Because right now you need it. 6 months ago, you helped me understand what it meant to open my heart to someone. A year ago, you let me save your life. We take turns being strong for each other. That's what partnership means. His words steadied her, reminded her that marriage was a long journey with both partners taking turns carrying the weight. She let herself lean on him through those early weeks of motherhood, accepting help without guilt, trusting that there would be times when he needed her strength in return. As Hope grew from newborn to infant, settling into patterns that made life more predictable, Lion found her footing. The exhaustion remained, but confidence grew alongside it. She learned to read her daughter's cries, to anticipate needs, to find joy in the small milestones of growth and development. And she wrote to her sister about all of it, the challenges and triumphs, the overwhelming love and occasional frustration, the way Caleb had transformed into a devoted father who would walk Hope for hours to soothe her, but still couldn't figure out how to properly fasten a diaper. May's responses grew increasingly wistful. She'd married the merchant's son as planned, a union that was comfortable but passionless. Her letter spoke of longing for something more, admiration for Lion's courage to choose differently, hints that perhaps she'd made the wrong choice in staying. Then, 8 months after Hope's birth, a letter arrived that changed everything. Lion was at the schoolhouse. She'd returned to teaching part-time, bringing Hope along in a cradle Sarah had helped her set up in the corner when the post arrived. She recognized her sister's handwriting, but noticed immediately that the envelope felt heavier than usual. Inside were 2 letters, one from May, one from their mother. She read May's first, her hands shaking. Dearest Lian, Father has suffered a stroke. He lives, but is much diminished, unable to speak clearly, his right side paralyzed. Mother has taken over the business with my help, and in this crisis, everything has shifted. She asks about you constantly, wants to know about her granddaughter, about your husband, about the life you've built. Father can no longer forbid contact, and Mother's grief at losing you has become unbearable to witness. I'm enclosing a letter from her. Read it with an open heart. With love. Mei Lian's hands trembled as she opened the second letter, seeing her mother's familiar script for the first time in over a year. My daughter, I have failed you. When you chose your own path, I should have celebrated your courage. Instead, I let your father's pride silence my love. I have lived with that regret every day since. Your sister's letters paint a picture of a woman who has found real happiness, real partnership, a child born of love rather than obligation. This is everything I wanted for you but was too afraid to say. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I ask only for a chance to know you again, to meet the granddaughter whose name represents the hope I nearly extinguished. If you would allow it, I would travel to meet your family, to see with my own eyes the life you've built. Your father can no longer speak against this, and I find I no longer care if he could. You are my daughter, and I have been silent too long. With all my love and deepest regret, Mother Lian read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she could fully process what it meant. Her mother wanted to come here, wanted to meet Hope and Caleb, wanted to bridge the gap that had divided them. She drove home that afternoon in a daze, the letters clutched in her hand. Caleb was in the barn when she arrived, and she found him there, barely able to speak through her tears. My mother, she wants to come here, wants to meet you and Hope. My father had a stroke, and everything's changed, and she's asking for a chance to reconnect. Caleb wrapped her in his arms, let her cry against his chest while he processed the news. What do you want? He finally asked. Not what you think you should want. What do you actually want? I want my mother to meet her granddaughter. Want her to see that I'm happy, that I made the right choice. She stopped, acknowledging a truth she'd been avoiding. I want my family back. Not the same as before, but some version of connection that acknowledges who I am now. Then invite her. We'll make her welcome, show her our life here. If she's brave enough to cross an ocean, we can be brave enough to open our home and hearts. So Lian wrote back, extending an invitation for her mother to visit. The response came quickly. Her mother would arrive by late summer, traveling across the ocean and across the continent to the small frontier town where her daughter had built an unexpected life. The months of preparation were both anxious and exciting. Lian wanted everything perfect. wanted to prove beyond doubt that her choice had been right. She threw herself into improving the ranch house, expanding the garden, making everything beautiful. Caleb watched her with gentle concern, finally sitting her down one evening. "Leanne, you don't have to prove anything. She's coming to meet her daughter and granddaughter, not to inspect your housekeeping. But I want her to see that I'm thriving, that this life is good. Then let her see the real life, not some polished version. Let her see you teaching children who adore you. See me working the ranch I've built. See Hope growing strong and happy. That's the proof, not whether the curtains are straight or the floors are spotless." His words helped her relax into the waiting, to focus on living their life rather than performing it. And when the day finally came when her mother was due to arrive, Leanne felt more nervous than she'd been on her wedding day. They met her at the stagecoach station, Leanne holding Hope while Caleb stood beside her offering silent support. When her mother stepped down from the coach, older and smaller than Leanne remembered, their eyes met across the dusty street. For a moment neither moved. Then her mother was crossing to her, tears streaming down her face, reaching out with trembling hands. "Leanne, my daughter." They embraced while Leanne cried, a year of separation and grief dissolving in that moment of reunion. Hope, caught between them, let out an indignant squawk that made them both laugh through their tears. "Mother, this is Hope, your granddaughter." Her mother looked at the baby with wonder, touching Hope's face with gentle fingers. "She's beautiful, she has your eyes." And her father's determination. Leanne turned to where Caleb stood a respectful distance away, giving them space. "Mother, this is my husband, Caleb Ward. Caleb, my mother." Caleb stepped forward, offering his hand with the same seriousness he'd shown at their wedding. "Mrs. Joe, welcome to Red Hollow Ridge." Leanne's mother studied him with the assessing gaze of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people. Then, to everyone's surprise, she bowed slightly in the traditional manner of respect. "Mr. Ward, thank you for making my daughter so happy." The visit that followed was both healing and complex. Leanne's mother stayed at the boarding house, spending days at the ranch learning her daughter's new life. She watched Leanne teach with evident pride, saw the respect the community showed her, observed Caleb's gentle patience with Hope, his obvious devotion to his wife, the partnership they'd built on mutual respect and love. In the evening, sitting on the ranch house porch while the sun set, mother and daughter talked about everything they'd missed. Leanne's mother spoke about her own marriage, arranged but eventually affectionate, and her regret at not fighting harder for her daughter's right to choose differently. Leanne shared the challenges and joys of her first year of marriage, the reality of frontier life with its hardships and unexpected rewards. "I was wrong," her mother said one evening, holding Hope while the baby slept. "I thought security and social standing were what mattered most. But watching you with your husband, with your daughter, living this life you chose, I see now that love and partnership are worth more than any amount of comfort or status." "It hasn't been easy," Leanne admitted. "Some days I miss having you nearby, miss the familiar. But I've never regretted choosing Caleb, choosing this life." "I can see that, and it makes me both proud and sad. Proud of your courage, sad that I nearly missed witnessing it." When the time came for her mother to leave 3 weeks later, the parting was tearful but hopeful rather than final. They'd repaired what had been broken, built a bridge that would allow ongoing connection despite the distance. Her mother promised to write regularly, to share news from home, to return for visits when possible. "I'll tell your father what I've seen," she said as they prepared to say goodbye. "Whether he accepts it or not, I won't keep silent anymore about my pride in you." Leanne watched the stagecoach pull away, Hope in her arms and Caleb's hand warm in hers. Something that had been broken inside her for over a year finally felt whole again. She had both families now, the one she'd been born into and the one she'd chosen to create. The seasons cycled through their rhythm, and life on the ranch settled into comfortable patterns. Hope grew from infant to toddler, her personality emerging fierce and curious like her mother, steady and kind like her father. The school board officially made Leanne's position permanent, working around her needs as a mother and supporting her unconventional teaching methods. Caleb's ranch prospered, his reputation growing as someone who understood the land and treated his animals with respect. Jack eventually married a widow from town, bringing his wife to live in the small cottage they built on the ranch property. The partnership between Caleb and Jack deepened into genuine friendship, their families intertwining in the way that happened in close-knit communities. And Leon and Caleb continued to grow together, their love deepening through shared challenges and joys. They learned each other's patterns, supported each other's dreams, built a life that honored both their backgrounds, while creating something entirely new. 2 years after Hope's birth, the town decided to hold its first proper spring festival. The event would celebrate the community's growth, featuring music, dancing, food, and games. Everyone was expected to attend, and excitement built through the weeks of preparation. Leon helped organize the educational displays, creating exhibits about frontier history and the diverse cultures that had built Red Hollow Ridge. Hope, now a confident toddler, insisted on helping, her contributions more enthusiasm than actual assistance. Caleb constructed booths and stages with other ranchers, the work bringing the community together in shared purpose. The evening of the festival arrived warm and clear, perfect weather blessing their efforts. Lanterns hung from trees and buildings, casting golden light over the celebration. Music filled the air, fiddles and guitars, songs both familiar and new. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every family, a feast that represented the community's abundance and generosity. Leanne stood near the schoolhouse exhibit, hope on her hip, watching the festivities with contentment. This town that had once whispered scandal about her now celebrated her contributions, accepted her completely as one of their own. She'd earned this belonging through patience and dedication, through proving her worth not just as a teacher, but as a person. "There you are." She turned to find Caleb approaching, handsome in the good clothes he rarely wore, his face relaxed in a smile. He'd been helping set up the dancing area, but now he reached for her with clear intent. "Dance with me," he said, offering his hand. "Caleb, you hate dancing." "I hate dancing with everyone except you. Come on, Hope can stay with Martha for a few minutes." Martha appeared as if summoned, scooping up the toddler with practiced ease. "Go on, you two. Enjoy yourselves. Hope and I will find some treats and cause mild havoc." So Leon let Caleb lead her to the dancing area, where other couples already swayed to the music. His hands settled warm against her back, their fingers interlacing, and they began to move together in the simple patterns they'd practiced in their kitchen during quiet evenings. He was right. He wasn't a natural dancer, still counted steps under his breath, and occasionally stumbled. But none of that mattered as they moved together beneath the lantern light, surrounded by their community, their daughter's laughter carrying from where Martha entertained her. "Happy?" Caleb asked softly. Leanne looked up at him, at this man who'd saved her life, and then given her a life worth saving. At the community they'd built together, the family they'd created, the love that had grown from crisis into something profound and lasting. "Completely happy," she answered, "more than I ever imagined possible." Around them, Red Hollow Ridge celebrated under a canopy of stars. The music played on, people danced and laughed and told stories that would become legend. And in the center of it all, a rancher and a teacher moved together with the easy grace of two people who'd learned to trust each other completely, who'd chosen each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that choice. The path that had begun with a desperate rescue on a dark morning had led here, to joy and belonging, to a family and a future, to love that had overcome every obstacle placed in its way. The past with all its pain had transformed into a present full of promise, and tomorrow stretched ahead bright with possibility. As the song ended and another began, Caleb pulled Leanne closer, and she rested her head against his shoulder. In that moment, beneath the warm glow of lanterns and the endless expanse of frontier sky, everything they'd fought for, everything they'd sacrificed, everything they'd built together felt absolutely and perfectly right. This was home. This was family. This was the life they'd chosen, and it was more than enough. It was everything.